This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I still have nightmares about that place. It's been 2 years since our trip into the Colorado backcountry, and I can't shake the feeling that we narrowly avoided something terrible, something that would have changed us forever, or worse. It started as just another adventure with my work buddies. The four of us, me, Kyle, Marcus, and Ethan, had been planning this digital detox trip for months. We're all software developers at the same firm in Boulder, and the constant connectivity was driving us nuts. Kyle suggested we go proper old school, topographic maps, compasses, no GPS, no phones. Just us and the wilderness for 5 days. We picked a remote area west of Denver, one of those places where the trailhead parking lot is basically just a widened section of dirt road. The plan was to hike about 10 miles in and set up a base camp, then explore from there. I'd done plenty of camping before, but never this deep into unmarked territory. The hike in was brutal. Our packs were heavy with supplies, and by the time we found a suitable spot, a flat shelf beneath this impressive rocky outcrop, we were exhausted. But man, the views were worth it. Mountains all around us, nothing but wilderness as far as we could see. That first night around the campfire was perfect. Clear sky, millions of stars, no cell reception, no emails, just 4 friends, some whiskey, and stupid stories. The next morning, we decided to leave our base camp set up and do a day hike westward. The map showed nothing special in that direction, just unmarked forest and some elevation changes, but we were curious what we might find. We packed light, just water, some trail mix, a first aid kit, and our navigation tools. The first couple hours were great. We spotted deer tracks, a hawk's nest, and even caught a glimpse of what might have been a bobcat slinking away through the underbrush. Around noon, we stopped for a quick lunch on this rocky ledge that gave us a view of a small valley below. That's when Marcus spotted what looked like an animal trail cutting through the trees. "Let's check it out," he said, already repacking his stuff. Marcus was always the most adventurous of us. The trail was narrow but defined, probably used by deer or elk. It wound downhill between some tight stands of pine trees, and we had to go single file. After about 15 minutes of following it, the trees started thinning out, and suddenly we were at the edge of a clearing. That's when we saw it, the cabin. It sat dead center in a circular clearing about 100 yards across. From where we stood, it looked ancient. Weathered logs stacked to form walls, a sagging roof missing several shingles, windows either broken or completely absent. The door hung crooked on one hinge. "Awesome," Kyle whispered. "Let's check it out." But I felt this immediate sense of wrongness. At first, I couldn't identify why. Then it hit me. The silence. Complete, absolute silence. No birds calling, no insects buzzing, no breeze rustling leaves. "Wait," I said, putting my arm out to stop Kyle. "Look at the ground." That's when we all noticed it. The grass changed about 50 feet out from the cabin in all directions. Outside this invisible boundary, normal forest floor, pine needles, healthy underbrush, moss. Inside, everything looked sick. The grass was yellow and patchy. The few bushes were brittle and brown, like they'd been dead for months. Ethan pointed to something near the boundary line. "Guys, what the hell is that?" We approached cautiously. It was a squirrel lying on its side, dead, but not decomposed at all, like it had just fallen over. A few feet away was a bird, same condition. As we slowly circled around the perimeter of this dead zone, We counted at least 7 small animal carcasses, all intact, all positioned like they'd simply dropped mid-motion. "This isn't right," Marcus muttered, and that was the understatement of the century. What really got to me was the fallen tree. It had come down, across this invisible boundary line. The section outside the circle was normal, bark intact, moss growing on it. But the portion inside the dead zone was gray and brittle, like all moisture had been sucked out of it. The change was so abrupt, so precise, you could have drawn a line with a ruler. None of us said it, but we all felt the same thing. There was no way any of us were stepping inside that circle. Kyle, who always needs to explain things scientifically, suggested, "Maybe it's a gas leak? Natural gas or carbon dioxide seeping up from underground?" "Then why the perfect circle?" Ethan countered. "And why aren't the animals decomposing?" We kept our distance, circling the perimeter. The cabin itself seemed to watch us. I know that sounds ridiculous. It's just a building, but I swear it felt like it was aware of our presence. The empty window frames were like eye sockets, following our movements. The silence was getting to me. Even our footsteps seemed muffled, like sound itself didn't want to exist near this place. The air felt thick, almost pressurized against my skin. "We should check the cabin," Marcus finally said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Are you insane?" I responded. "I'm not setting foot in there." "We don't have to go inside the circle," he explained. "We can use the binoculars to look through the windows from here." Ethan had brought a decent pair of binoculars, so we took turns scanning the cabin from a safe distance. What I saw turned my blood cold. Through one of the broken windows, I could make out the interior. A table with plates still set, a rocking chair, clothes hanging on hooks. But everything looked preserved yet desiccated, like this place had been vacuum sealed for decades. "Someone was living here," I said, passing the binoculars to Kyle. "Holy shit," he whispered after taking a look. "There's a journal or book open on the table." We all squinted, straining to see more details, when something happened that I still can't explain. The door of the cabin moved. Not much, just a slight shift, but enough that we all saw it. There was absolutely no wind, nothing that could have caused it to move. "We're leaving, now." Ethan's voice was steady but urgent. No one argued. We backed away slowly, keeping our eyes on the cabin until we reached the tree line. Then we practically ran up that animal trail, not stopping until we'd put a good mile between us and that clearing. When we finally stopped to catch our breath, Kyle pulled out the map. "Where exactly was that? I don't see any structures marked." He was right. The map showed nothing but wilderness in that area, no buildings, no mining claims, nothing that would explain an old cabin. Back at our camp that evening, we tried to make sense of what we'd seen. The theories ranged from the plausible to the absurd. Chemical spill, secret government testing site, some bizarre localized phenomenon. "What if it's some kind of radiation?" Ethan suggested. "There used to be uranium mining in parts of Colorado." "Radiation doesn't create a perfect circle," Marcus countered. "And it doesn't preserve dead animals like that." I couldn't shake the image of that fallen tree, healthy on one side of the invisible line, dead on the other, or those animals, looking like they died mid-step without a mark on them. That night, none of us slept well. I kept imagining the sound of footsteps around our tent, though when I listened closely, there was nothing. Just that unnatural silence that seemed to have followed us from the clearing. The next morning, we made the unanimous decision to cut our trip short. The enthusiasm was gone. We packed up camp and hiked back to the trailhead in record time, barely talking along the way. Once we got back to civilization, the experience seemed even more surreal. Kyle, always the researcher, spent weeks looking up the area's history. He found nothing about an old cabin in those coordinates. No records of chemical spills, no military testing, no mining accidents. Nothing that would explain what we saw. Marcus suggested we report it to the Forest Service, but what would we say? We found a magic death circle in the woods. They'd think we were pulling a prank or had eaten some bad mushrooms. 2 months after our trip, Ethan moved to Chicago for a new job. Before he left, he told me something that still gives me chills. He said he'd been having the same recurring dream. He's standing at the edge of that circle, and something inside the cabin is calling his name, telling him to step inside. In the dream, he always refuses, but each night the voice gets more persuasive. Kyle eventually convinced himself it was some kind of natural gas pocket or carbon dioxide seep, the kind that can create death zones where animals die from lack of oxygen. He said the perfect circle could be explained by the underlying geology. I nodded and pretended to accept his explanation, but it doesn't account for so many things. The preserved animals, the half-dead tree, the door moving. As for me, I've tried to put it behind me, but I can't. Sometimes I'll be drifting off to sleep and suddenly jolt awake, overcome with the certainty that if any of us had stepped into that circle, we would never have come back out, at least not as ourselves. Last week I received a postcard from Marcus. He'd gone back, alone. All it said was, "I need to know. Someone lived there. Someone survived inside. I have to see what they wrote in that journal." I've called him every day since. No answer. His girlfriend says he told her he was going camping with friends. She thought he meant me. I don't know what to do. Part of me feels like I should go back and look for him, but a much bigger part knows that if I did, I'd find his body at the edge of that clearing, perfectly preserved, without a mark on him, like he simply stopped existing mid-step. Some places aren't meant to be found. Some questions shouldn't be answered. And that cabin, sitting in its perfect circle of death, deep in the Colorado wilderness where no map shows it existing, that place should be left alone forever. I just hope Marcus made the same choice I did and turned around before crossing that invisible line. But the silence on the other end of the phone tells me otherwise. Story 2. I still can't sleep properly, and it's been 3 months since everything happened. I keep checking my doors, windows, garage, everything. I installed a new security system last week, but it doesn't help much with the anxiety. Every notification makes my heart race. I guess I should start from the beginning. Last year, I finally had enough savings to buy my first house, a small but nice place in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Nothing fancy, but it was mine, you know? I was so proud of myself. I'd worked my ass off for years, saving every penny from my marketing job. The neighborhood was perfect. Mature trees, well-kept lawns, and mostly older residents who kept to themselves. Across the street lived this older couple, Benjamin and Martha. They must have been in their 70s, super sweet people who spent most days sitting on their front porch. Benjamin would wave every time I drove past, and eventually I started stopping by to chat. They were like the grandparents I never really had growing up. About 3 months after I moved in, this young guy bought the house next to mine. Quinn was maybe 27, 28 tops. The first thing everyone noticed was his car, a brand new BMW M5. Not exactly common in our modest neighborhood. He moved in with minimal furniture, but immediately started renovating. New kitchen, bathrooms, landscaping, the works. Must have dropped at least $100,000 in the first month. Quinn introduced himself to me while I was getting my mail one evening. Designer clothes, expensive watch, perfectly styled hair. He said he did freelance creative work for internet, personalities, whatever that meant. Made it sound like he was pulling in serious cash. I remember feeling a bit intimidated, like I was suddenly the poor neighbor, despite being so proud of my own house. Benjamin and Martha took to Quinn immediately. He'd stop by their porch almost daily, bringing them coffee or pastries from some fancy bakery downtown. They'd talk for hours about sports, investments, travel. Quinn always had stories about exotic vacations or celebrity encounters. I could hear them laughing from my yard. Everything seemed normal for the first few months. Quinn worked from home but traveled frequently. He'd disappear for days at a time, then return with stories about business trips to LA or New York. Sometimes he'd invite neighbors over for drinks, showing off his renovated space and expensive whiskey collection. I went once but felt out of place among his designer furniture and abstract art that probably cost more than my car. Then, around month 4, I noticed something strange. A white convertible, a Lexus I think, started showing up at Quinn's house when he wasn't home. The first time I saw it, I was heading to work around 8 in the morning. Quinn's BMW wasn't in the driveway, but this white car pulled up. A young blonde woman got out, walked straight to his front door, and let herself in with a key. I didn't think much of it initially. Girlfriend, maybe? But then it happened again and again, always when Quinn wasn't home. She'd arrive, let herself in, stay for varying amounts of time, sometimes 30 minutes, sometimes hours, then leave. I mentioned it to Benjamin once while helping him with yard work. "Oh, that's Ellie," he said casually. "Quinn's girlfriend, nice girl, brings us cookies sometimes." The weird part was, I'd never seen Quinn and Ellie together, not once. When Quinn hosted gatherings, she wasn't there. When he was home, she never visited. It was always when he was away. About 6 months after Quinn moved in, I was working from home when I heard shouting from his driveway. I peeked through my blinds and saw Quinn and Ellie in what looked like a serious argument. He was gesturing wildly, and she was crying, clutching his arm as he tried to get into his car. I couldn't make out exactly what they were saying, but I distinctly heard him yell, "This isn't working anymore," before he drove off. After that day, I didn't see Ellie for maybe 2 weeks. Then, strangely, she was back to her routine of visiting when Quinn wasn't home. This time, though, she started staying longer. Once, her car remained parked in his driveway overnight, even though Quinn's BMW never returned. One evening in early October, I was having dinner with Benjamin and Martha on their porch, something we'd started doing semi-regularly. Benjamin mentioned that Quinn had been acting jumpy lately. "Boy looks exhausted," he said between bites of Martha's lasagna. "Told me he's not sleeping well. Thinks someone's been in his house while he's gone." Martha nodded. He asked us if we'd seen anyone strange going in or out. We mentioned Ellie, of course, but he got this weird look on his face. A chill ran down my spine. "What kind of look?" Benjamin set down his fork. "Scared. That's the only way I can describe it." The boy looked terrified. The following week, everything exploded. It was a Thursday night around 11. I was in bed watching Netflix when suddenly red and blue lights flooded my bedroom. I jumped up and looked outside to see 3 police cars and an ambulance parked in front of Quinn's house. Neighbors were gathering on their lawns, all of us trying to figure out what was happening. I threw on a jacket and hurried outside. Benjamin and Martha were already on their porch in their robes, Martha clutching Benjamin's arm. We watched in shock as paramedics rushed into Quinn's house. Minutes later, they emerged with him on a stretcher, oxygen mask on his face, blood soaking through bandages on his chest and arms. Behind them, 2 officers led out Ellie in handcuffs. She wasn't crying or resisting, just staring straight ahead with this eerie, blank expression. One of the officers came over to talk to Benjamin and Martha, probably because Quinn had mentioned their friendship. I stood close enough to overhear. Apparently, Quinn had called 911 himself, barely conscious, saying his ex-girlfriend had stabbed him multiple times. The next morning, our neighborhood was buzzing with rumors. Someone said Ellie had been stalking Quinn. Someone else claimed it was a drug deal gone wrong. No one knew the truth, and Quinn remained in the hospital for almost a week. When he finally returned home, he looked like a shell of himself. Thinner, paler, with a caution in his movements that hadn't been there before. I brought over a casserole. Stupid, I know, but I didn't know what else to do, and he invited me in. His house, once immaculate, was now covered in fingerprint dust. Several windows had been replaced, and there were new deadbolts on every door. "I should have seen it coming," he said quietly, barely touching the food. All the warning signs were there. Quinn explained that he dated Ellie briefly, just 3 weeks, after meeting her at a client event. When he tried to end things, she became obsessive, calling him constantly, showing up at his workplace. He thought moving to our neighborhood, which was across town from her, would solve the problem. He never gave her his new address. "But she found me somehow," he continued, staring at his hands. "Started following me. I didn't realize how bad it was until Benjamin mentioned she was coming to my house when I wasn't here." My blood ran cold. "How was she getting in?" "She stole my spare key during those 3 weeks we dated. Made a copy." His voice cracked. "She's been coming into my house for months while I was at work or traveling. At first, I just noticed small things out of place. A moved book, my toothbrush wet when I hadn't used it. I thought I was going crazy. It got worse from there. Quinn discovered hidden cameras in his bedroom and bathroom. Ellie had installed tracking software on his phone. She'd been monitoring his texts, emails, even his banking information. She started demanding things," he said. "Expensive gifts, trips. Said I owed her for wasting her time. When I refused, she threatened to tell people I had abused her, that she had evidence. I was terrified it would ruin my business." The night of the attack, Quinn came home early from a business trip, catching Ellie in his house. She'd been sleeping in his bed, wearing his clothes. When confronted, she grabbed a knife from his kitchen and stabbed him repeatedly, screaming that if she couldn't have him, no one could. "The doctors said another half-inch to the left, and I would have died," he whispered, unconsciously touching the bandage visible under his shirt. A week later, Quinn put his house up for sale. He told Benjamin he couldn't stay, that Ellie's friends knew where he lived, and he didn't feel safe. He moved out almost immediately, leaving most of his furniture behind. The last time I saw him was the day he left. He stopped by my house on his way out of town. "Be careful who you let into your life," he said, handing me a small bag. Inside was a device that detects hidden cameras. "Check your house regularly. You never know who's watching." That was 3 months ago. Quinn's house sold quickly despite the incident. A young family moved in last month. They seem nice, normal. But I can't help watching them, wondering if they know what happened in their new home. I keep thinking about how easily Quinn was violated, how someone took his keys, his privacy, his sense of safety. I check my locks obsessively now. I scan my bedroom for hidden devices weekly. I park in different spots when I go shopping, just in case someone's following me. Yesterday, I was getting my mail when a white car drove slowly past my house. Not Ellie's convertible, just an ordinary sedan. But my heart nearly stopped. I rushed inside and locked the door, peering through the blinds until it disappeared around the corner. Benjamin told me last week that Ellie was released on bail pending trial. Her family has money, apparently. I haven't slept properly since hearing that. Every creaking floorboard, every notification on my phone makes me jump. The worst part isn't the fear, though. It's knowing that someone can seem completely normal, friendly, successful, put together like Quinn, and still be harboring such terror. It makes me question everyone around me. The new neighbors, the delivery guy, the friendly barista who remembers my order. I don't know how to feel safe again. I don't know if I ever will. Story 3. I never thought my sophomore year would turn into a living nightmare. Looking back, the signs were there from the beginning, but I was too naive to connect the dots until it was almost too late. After missing the deadline for on-campus housing, totally my fault, I got caught up in finals and forgot to submit the paperwork. I was desperate to find somewhere affordable near campus. Anyone who's tried to find housing near Westlake University knows it's basically impossible unless you've got rich parents or don't mind living with 7 other people in a 2-bedroom apartment. So when I found this co-op housing place just 3 blocks from campus for about half what other students were paying, I jumped on it without asking too many questions. It was this weird setup, 3 houses clustered together on one lot with a shared courtyard and laundry facilities. Most residents were students, which was cool, and the property manager, Mr. Keene, seemed nice enough, if a bit disorganized. I moved in last August, and the first few weeks were pretty normal. I shared the blue house, that's what we called it, with 4 other students. 2 engineering majors, a psychology student, and a guy named Lee who was studying film. We weren't best friends or anything, but we got along okay. It was around mid-September when I first noticed her. I came down to the kitchen to make breakfast before my 8 a.m. class, and there she was, just standing in the corner by the fridge watching us. She was maybe in her late 50s, with this unkempt gray hair that hung limply around her shoulders. She wore these baggy clothes that looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks, and she had this noticeable limp when she moved. I remember freezing with my cereal box in hand, uncertain what to do. She wasn't doing anything threatening, just watching, with this completely blank expression. Not smiling, not frowning, just staring. Hello?" I said. She didn't respond, just shifted her weight and continued staring. My housemate Trevor came in a moment later and didn't seem surprised to see her. "Morning, ma'am," he said casually as he grabbed a coffee mug. She nodded slightly but still didn't speak. After about 5 minutes of this incredibly awkward silence, she just turned and limped out the back door. "Who was that?" I asked Trevor. He shrugged. "One of the residents from the greenhouse, I think. She's kinda kooky, but harmless." I accepted this explanation at the time. After all, it was a diverse housing community, and I figured maybe she was a non-traditional student or staff member. But then I started seeing her everywhere. I'd be walking to class, and she'd be on the opposite side of the street, keeping pace with me. I'd be studying in the courtyard, and she'd be sitting on the steps of the greenhouse, just watching. Once, I was at the campus coffee shop 2 blocks away, and I spotted her outside, staring through the window directly at me. The most unsettling incident in those early days happened when I was in my room on the 2nd floor, working on a paper. I glanced out the window and saw her standing on the sidewalk below, looking up at my window. When I noticed her and instinctively waved, stupid I know, she got really excited. Like her whole demeanor changed in an instant. She started bouncing up and down and then literally ran away, her limp somehow gone in that moment of excitement. That's when I started asking more questions. "So what's the deal with that older woman who lives in the greenhouse?" I asked Lee one evening. He gave me this weird look. "Oh, her. Yeah, she's associated with the university somehow." "What does that mean? Is she a professor or staff member?" "I don't think so. Mr. Keene just told us once that she has some connection to the school and to just leave her be. She's harmless, just kooky." There was that word again, kooky. It seemed like an intentionally vague description, and it made me uncomfortable. I decided to ask Mr. Keene directly the next time I saw him. He collected rent in person on the 1st of each month, so I waited until then. "Oh, that's just my colleague," he said, not meeting my eyes. "She helps with the property sometimes. Don't mind her." I didn't find this explanation satisfying, but I didn't push it. Looking back, I should have trusted my instincts. October was when things started getting truly disturbing. I woke up around 2 in the morning to use the bathroom, and, as I was heading back to my room, I saw her standing at the end of the hallway, just standing there in the dark. I nearly had a heart attack. "What are you doing in our house?" I asked, trying to sound firm despite my racing heart. She didn't answer, just stared at me with those vacant eyes. "You can't be in here," I continued. "This isn't your house." After what felt like forever, she turned and limped down the stairs. I heard the front door open and close. The next morning, I told my housemates what happened. They seemed concerned, but not alarmed. "Maybe lock your bedroom door at night," Trevor suggested, "just to be safe." That seemed like solid advice, so I started doing exactly that. I also emailed the university housing department to ask about the woman, but they replied saying they had no official connection to our co-op housing complex beyond listing it as an off-campus option. A few days later, my room key disappeared from my keychain. I had it when I locked my door before going to class, but it was gone when I returned. I had to ask Mr. Keene for a replacement, which he provided reluctantly after charging me $20. "Try not to lose this one," he said with an edge to his voice. I didn't lose it, I wanted to say, but something told me to keep quiet. That night, I pushed my desk chair under the doorknob before going to bed. It wasn't much, but it made me feel a little safer. The following week, I caught her going through my laundry in the shared laundry room. She was holding up one of my shirts, smelling it. I cleared my throat, and she dropped it immediately, shuffling past me without making eye contact. I started doing my laundry at a friend's apartment after that. By early November, I was seriously considering breaking my lease and finding somewhere else to live, even if it meant taking out another loan. But affordable housing near campus was still impossible to find mid-semester. The night everything came to a head started like any other. I was up late finishing an essay, and around 1 in the morning, I finally decided to call it quits. I followed my new routine, brushed my teeth, locked my door, wedged the chair under the knob, and went to bed. I don't know exactly what time it was when I woke up, maybe 3 or 4 in the morning. At first, I couldn't figure out what had disturbed me. The house was quiet, too quiet maybe, and then I heard it, a soft scraping sound coming from my closet. My blood ran cold. My closet was one of those old-fashioned walk-ins, about 4 feet deep. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see movement in the darkness. "Hello," I called out, my voice embarrassingly shaky. "Is someone there?" The scraping stopped. I reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight. Slowly, I got out of bed and approached the closet. Looking back, this was incredibly stupid. I should have run from the room, woken up my housemates, called the police. But in that moment, I think part of me was hoping for a rational explanation. A mouse, maybe, or clothes falling from a hanger. I pulled the closet door open wider and shined the light inside. And there she was, crouched among my hanging clothes, wearing one of my ties around her neck. In her hand was a kitchen knife, one of the large ones from our shared kitchen downstairs. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Her eyes were wide, almost feverish, and her breathing was rapid. Then her face twisted into something I can only describe as hunger. She lunged at me with the knife. I stumbled backward, tripping over my desk chair and falling hard. The knife missed my chest, but sliced across my forearm as I raised it to protect myself. The pain was immediate and shocking. She was on top of me in seconds, raising the knife again. I grabbed her wrist with both hands, trying to keep the blade away from my face. She was surprisingly strong for her size and age, fueled by whatever delusion had brought her into my room. "Help!" I screamed as loud as I could. "Someone help me!" We struggled on the floor, rolling and thrashing. Blood from my arm was making my grip slippery. The knife inched closer to my throat. Just when I thought I couldn't hold her off any longer, my door burst open. Lee stood there in his boxers, taking in the scene with horror. "What the fuck?" he yelled, then lunged forward to help. With Lee's assistance, we managed to disarm her and pin her to the ground. She was howling now, making these inhuman noises, thrashing and spitting. Trevor appeared in the doorway next, followed by our other housemates. Someone called 911 while we continued restraining her. She kept screaming one phrase over and over, "He's mine! He's mine!" The police arrived about 10 minutes later, though it felt like hours. They handcuffed her and took her away, while an EMT treated the cut on my arm. It needed 12 stitches. The whole time I kept asking, "Who is she? Why was she in my room?" It wasn't until the next day that we got answers. A detective came to take our statements and explained what they'd learned. The woman's name was Margaret Keene. She was Mr. Keene's sister, and she suffered from severe schizophrenia and other mental health issues. Instead of getting her proper care, Mr. Keene had been secretly housing her in one of the unoccupied rooms in the greenhouse. Apparently, he'd been embezzling money from the property owners by collecting rent for her occupied room while actually using it to house his sister. The detective explained that Margaret had become fixated on me for reasons that might never be clear. They found a collection of my things in her room: socks, a notebook, even hair from my brush. She'd been stealing my stuff for weeks. Mr. Keene was arrested for negligence, fraud, and a host of other charges. The property owners, who lived out of state, were horrified and immediately sent representatives to meet with all residents. They offered to let us break our leases without penalty, which most of us did. I stayed with a friend until I could find new housing. As for Margaret, she was committed to a psychiatric facility. I've tried to feel sympathy for her. Clearly, she needed help that her brother failed to provide. But it's hard to feel charitable towards someone who hid in your closet with a knife, wearing your tie like some kind of trophy. It's been 6 months now. The cut on my arm has healed, though the scar is still visible. I've moved into a proper apartment with better security. I'm in therapy, working through the trauma. But I still check my closet every night before bed. I still wake up sometimes, thinking I hear that scraping sound. And whenever I catch someone looking at me for too long in public, my heart starts racing. Because I'll never forget the look in her eyes when she lunged at me, that horrible mixture of obsession and hunger that I can't explain or understand to this day. Story 4. Okay, I don't typically share this story because most people either don't believe me or think I'm being melodramatic. But I need to get this off my chest, and I figure if anyone would understand, it'd be people here. This happened about 7 years ago when I was in my early 20s. A group of my college friends and I decided to go camping for a weekend in the Allegheny National Forest. There were 5 of us: me, my roommate Tyler, his girlfriend Amber, my friend Kate, and Jesse. Jesse was kind of the newcomer to our group. He was Tyler's co-worker at the outdoor equipment store where they worked part-time, and this was only the 2nd or 3rd time we'd all hung out together. We drove about 3 hours from Pittsburgh to reach our campsite, way deeper into the woods than the popular spots where families go. Tyler was really into authentic outdoor experiences and insisted we needed to be at least a 2-hour hike from any roads or established campsites. I remember feeling a bit uneasy about how remote it was, but I didn't want to be the one to chicken out. We arrived at the forest around 2 in the afternoon and started our hike. Jesse was telling us stories the whole time about his previous camping trips, and I have to admit, he was a great storyteller. He had this way of speaking that just drew you in. Lots of pauses at the right moments, changing his voice for different characters. It was entertaining, and it made the long hike go by faster. We set up camp around 4:30 in this small clearing surrounded by really tall pine trees. The spot was beautiful, I'll give Tyler that. We could barely hear anything except birds and the wind through the trees. No car sounds, no distant voices, nothing. Just us and the forest. As it started getting dark, we built a fire and cooked some hot dogs and beans. We passed around a bottle of whiskey, and the whole thing felt exactly like those camping trips you see in movies. Friends laughing, the crackling fire, stars overhead. It was perfect. After dinner, we naturally fell into telling ghost stories. Kate went first with some standard story about a hitchhiker ghost. Amber told one about her supposedly haunted childhood home. When it was Jesse's turn, he got this really serious look on his face. "I don't know if I should tell this one," he said, staring into the fire. "It's not just a story. It's something that actually happened in these woods." I rolled my eyes, thinking it was part of his storytelling technique. Everyone always claims their story is true or happened to my friend's cousin or whatever. Classic move. "Well, now you have to tell us," Tyler said, putting his arm around Amber. Jesse took a long swig of whiskey and passed the bottle. "All right, but don't blame me if you can't sleep tonight." He explained that he'd been talking to an old man at a gas station on the edge of the forest a few months ago. The man had worked as a park ranger for over 30 years and had told Jesse about a series of deaths that had occurred in these exact woods about 15 years back. "The rangers don't talk about it," Jesse said, lowering his voice so we had to lean in. "They don't want to scare away tourists, but in 2008, they found 6 bodies in these woods over the span of 8 months. I felt the first real chill then. The way he said it, not dramatic, just matter of fact, made it sound more credible than your typical campfire tale. Jesse continued, describing how the bodies were found in different parts of the forest, miles apart from each other. The victims were all different. 2 adult men in their 40s, a woman in her 30s, a college-aged guy, a teenage girl, and finally a 13-year-old boy. "The weird thing," Jesse said, poking at the fire with a stick, sending sparks flying upward, was that they all had the same signature. He explained that each victim had 3 specific fingers missing from their left hand: the pointer finger, the ring finger, and the pinky finger. Just those 3, always from the left hand. "The bodies weren't even that messed up otherwise," Jesse said. "No signs of struggle, no other wounds. It's like they just laid down and died, and then someone carefully removed those specific fingers." "That's bullshit," I said, trying to break the tension that was building. "Someone would have heard about this. It would have been on the news." Jesse shrugged. The old ranger said they kept it quiet, called it animal attacks officially, but the coroner knew better. The cuts were surgical, precise. Someone took those fingers deliberately. He went on to describe how the police had noticed a pattern. The victims seemed to be arranged by size, from largest to smallest. The first victim was a 6'4" lumber worker. The last was a small 13-year-old boy. The breakthrough came when they found a partial fingerprint at the scene of the fifth victim, Jesse said. It matched a man who had been in the system for a minor offense years earlier. But get this, the print was from a middle finger, and this man had lost his ring and pinky fingers years before in an industrial accident. I felt my stomach tighten. The fire popped loudly, making Kate jump. The police theorized that this man was collecting fingers to replace his own, Jesse continued. That's why he took specific ones. He needed a pointer finger, a ring finger, and a pinky finger that would match his remaining middle and thumb. So did they catch him? Amber asked, her voice barely audible. Jesse shook his head slowly. That's the thing. They never found him. And the last victim, the boy, he only had 2 fingers missing, the ring and pinky. The pointer finger was still there. What does that mean? Tyler asked. It means, Jesse said, looking each of us in the eyes, that he finally found the pointer finger he was looking for. He completed his collection. We all sat in silence for a long moment. The fire crackled. Something rustled in the bushes behind me, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. But they never caught him? I finally asked. Never, Jesse said. The old ranger told me they think he moved on to another state, or maybe he's still out here somewhere. Maybe he's still collecting. Why would he still be collecting? Kate asked. I thought he found all the fingers he needed. Jesse shrugged. Fingers don't last forever. Maybe he needs replacements periodically. I still remember how the air seemed to change after that story. The darkness beyond our campfire felt deeper, more threatening. Every snap of a twig made us all tense up. We tried to laugh it off, but it wasn't working. Let's call it a night, Tyler finally suggested, and no one argued. I barely slept that night. Our tents suddenly felt like thin, useless barriers against the forest. I kept thinking about those victims with their missing fingers, wondering if they'd been camping just like us. Every time the wind moved the sides of my tent, I imagined someone, or something, brushing against it. The worst part was when I had to pee around 3 in the morning. I debated just holding it till sunrise, but eventually I couldn't anymore. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped my tent as quietly as possible. The forest was pitch black. My flashlight beam seemed pathetically small against the vast darkness. As I walked a short distance from camp, I kept spinning around, sure that someone was watching me. I kept my left hand in my pocket, fingers curled into a tight fist. When I got back to my tent, I noticed something strange. One of our coolers was open. I was sure we'd closed everything up because Tyler had been worried about bears. I shone my flashlight around but didn't see any signs of animals, just the open cooler, some food items clearly rummaged through. I closed it and went back to my tent, heart pounding. I told myself it was probably a raccoon or something, but I couldn't shake the feeling of wrongness. The next morning, I mentioned the cooler to the others. Yeah, I heard something messing with our stuff around too, Tyler said casually. Figured it was just a raccoon. Did anyone else hear anything last night? I asked. No one had except Kate, who mentioned hearing what sounded like footsteps at one point, but she'd been too scared to look outside. As we packed up, I noticed Jesse watching me with an odd expression. Good story last night, I said to him, trying to sound casual. Really freaked us out. He nodded slowly. Yeah, good story. Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. The hike back to our car felt 10 times longer than the hike in. We were all tired, hungover, and on edge after a night of poor sleep. No one mentioned Jesse's story, but I could tell we were all thinking about it. We kept close together, no one wanting to lag behind. About halfway back, I realized Jesse was walking strangely, favoring his right hand for everything. When he needed to push branches away, he used his right hand, even when it would have been more natural to use his left. "You hurt your hand?" I asked him. He quickly shoved his left hand into his pocket. "Just a little. Slept on it wrong." I don't know what made me so suspicious. Maybe it was lack of sleep, or maybe Jesse's story had gotten to me more than I wanted to admit. But when we stopped for a water break a little later, I watched carefully as he took his water bottle out. He kept his left hand in his pocket. "Let me see your hand," I said suddenly, surprising even myself. Everyone looked at me like I was crazy. "What?" Jesse asked, looking genuinely confused. "Your left hand. You've been hiding it all morning." Tyler stepped in. "Dude, what's your problem?" But something in Jesse's eyes, a flicker of something, made my heart race. "Show us your hand, Jesse," I insisted. Slowly, he pulled his left hand from his pocket. It was perfectly normal. 5 fingers, no scars, nothing unusual. I felt like an idiot. Everyone was staring at me. "Sorry," I mumbled. "That story really got to me, I guess." Jesse laughed, breaking the tension. "That's the point of a good campfire story, right?" We made it back to the car without further incident, and the drive home was mostly silent. We dropped Jesse off first, at his apartment in the city. As he got out of the car, he turned back and grinned at us. "Next time, I'll tell you about the Witch of Allegheny," he said with a wink. We never went camping with Jesse again. Not because of my weird behavior, though that didn't help, but because Tyler and he had some falling out at work a few weeks later. I never found out what happened exactly. About a year after that trip, I was scrolling through local news online when I saw a small article about human remains found in Allegheny National Forest. The article was frustratingly vague, mentioning only that foul play was suspected. I became obsessed with finding out more. I called the newspaper, scoured follow-up articles, even considered calling the park rangers directly. Eventually, a more detailed story came out. The victim had been a hiker, missing for several months. The body was badly decomposed, but one detail stood out. 3 fingers on the left hand were missing. I immediately called Tyler, who thought I was overreacting. "It's a coincidence," he insisted. "Jesse's story was just a story." But I couldn't let it go. I tried to find Jesse on social media to ask him about the story, where he'd really heard it, if there was any truth to it. But I couldn't find him anywhere online. It was like he didn't exist. Tyler told me Jesse had quit his job suddenly. No, notice, around the same time as that news story. No one knew where he'd gone. That was 7 years ago. I haven't been camping since. Sometimes I wonder if Jesse was just a really good storyteller who happened to leave town around the same time as a murder that coincidentally matched his story. Or if he was telling us something real that night, something he knew from first-hand experience. Either way, I still catch myself tucking my left hand into my pocket when I'm walking alone at night, and I still check the local news for stories about missing fingers. Story 5. I still can't wrap my head around what we found that weekend. It's been 3 years, and I find myself thinking about those backpacks way more often than I should. Something about the whole situation just wasn't right. So last May, my buddy Greg and I decided to get away for a long weekend. We both needed a break from work stress, relationship drama, all that normal life crap. Greg's the one with the decent 404 Tacoma, and he knew about this spot up an old logging road about 2 hours north of town. Not exactly wilderness, but definitely off the beaten path. The kind of spot you'd only know about if someone told you. We headed out on a Thursday afternoon. The drive started normal enough on highways, then county roads, but the last 7 miles was this washed-out logging road that hadn't seen maintenance in years. We're talking serious ruts, fallen branches, a couple spots where we had to get out and move rocks. No way a regular car could have made it up there. We only passed one other vehicle the entire time, some Forest Service truck heading the opposite direction. We finally reached the campground around 4 in the afternoon, and I use that term loosely. It was basically just a small clearing with a couple of old fire rings, some picnic tables that were half rotted, and a path leading downhill to what looked like outhouses. No amenities, no water source except a small creek about a quarter-mile away. Definitely no cell service. Just the kind of spot where you could do whatever you wanted without anyone bothering you. After we parked, we started unloading our gear. The weather was perfect. Mid-60s, slight breeze, sun filtering through the pine trees. We figured we'd set up our tents first, then gather firewood before it got dark. Greg wandered off while I was hammering in tent stakes, saying he needed to check out the bathroom situation. Can't blame him. After a bumpy 2-hour drive, nature calls. He was gone maybe 10 minutes before coming back with this weird look on his face. "Dude, you need to see the outhouse," he said, not really explaining further. I figured maybe there was something gross or funny down there, like some bizarre graffiti or a massive spider. You know how guys are with that stuff. "Can it wait until I finish setting up my tent?" "No, man, you really need to check this out now," Greg insisted. There was something in his voice that caught my attention. Not exactly fear, but definitely concern. So I followed him down this narrow dirt path, maybe 40 meters from our campsite, to where 2 outhouses stood. They were those typical backcountry wooden structures, weathered gray from years in the elements, with crescent moons carved into the doors. Greg pointed to the first one. "Look inside there," he said, staying back a bit. I pulled open the door, half expecting to find something dead or disgusting. Instead, what I saw made me freeze. Propped against the back wall of this nasty outhouse were 3 large backpacks. Not cheap day packs either. These were serious expedition-grade packs, the kind serious hikers use for multi-week trips. High-end North Face and Osprey stuff, probably worth at least $500 each. "What the hell?" I muttered, stepping inside to get a better look. The outhouse itself was disgusting. Cobwebs in the corners, the expected smell. But these backpacks looked relatively clean and new. "Look inside them," Greg said from the doorway. I hesitated. Shouldn't we leave other people's stuff alone? I already peeked. Trust me, you want to see this. I carefully unzipped the first pack, a dark green North Face, and found exactly what you'd expect. A sleeping bag compressed in its stuff sack, some clothes in Ziploc bags to keep them dry, a camp stove, water filter, typical backpacking gear. Everything neatly organized, clearly belonging to someone who knew what they were doing in the backcountry. The second pack, a blue Osprey, was similar. More clothes, a first aid kit, some freeze-dried meals, a small tent strapped to the outside. Normal stuff. But the third pack, this massive black 80-liter behemoth, that's when things got weird. I unzipped it and just stared. The entire pack, from bottom to top, was filled with Skittles. Not just a few packs for a sugar fix on the trail. I mean filled to capacity with every variety of Skittles imaginable. Regular red packs, purple tropical ones, green sour packs, blue wild berry ones. Some were the small snack-sized bags, others were the share size, and there were even some of those massive party-sized bags, stacked, stuffed, and crammed into every available inch of this giant backpack. Just Skittles, nothing else. No clothes, no gear, no water bottle, no identification, just candy. What the actual fuck? I remember saying, looking back at Greg, who was just shaking his head. That's easily 100 pounds of Skittles, he said. Who the hell hikes into a remote campsite with that much candy? I zipped everything back up exactly as we found it and stepped out of the outhouse. We both stood there for a minute, not saying anything, just processing how bizarre this was. Maybe they're coming back for them, I suggested. Like maybe they're out on a day hike from here? Greg shook his head. There's no trails from here, man. And why leave your gear in an outhouse? Why not at your campsite? And why would one pack have nothing but Skittles? We walked back to our camp and finished setting up, but the whole time my mind was racing with possibilities. Drug smugglers using candy as a cover, some weird prank, a drop spot for something illegal. None of it made sense. That night around the campfire, we kept coming back to those backpacks. The more we talked about it, the creepier it felt. Who leaves thousands of dollars worth of gear just sitting in an outhouse in the middle of nowhere? And why Skittles, of all things? Not food that would be useful for camping, like protein bars or jerky, but literally just candy. Maybe we should leave, Greg suggested after we'd been hypothesizing for hours. This feels wrong, like we've stumbled into something we shouldn't have. I'll admit I considered it, but we'd driven all that way, and the spot was beautiful. Plus, it was already dark, and navigating that logging road at night wasn't appealing. Let's stay tonight and see if anyone shows up, I said. If we're still freaked out tomorrow, we can bail. We agreed to that, but I don't think either of us slept well. Every sound in the forest had me wide awake, imagining some weirdo coming to collect their Skittles stash. I kept my hunting knife right next to my sleeping bag, just in case. Morning came, and no one had appeared. We made breakfast and decided to stay, but kept looking down the road for signs of other vehicles. None came. We hiked around the area that day, fished in the creek a bit, but constantly found ourselves checking the outhouses. The backpacks remained untouched. By day 3, the initial shock had worn off somewhat, but the mystery remained. We'd been there Friday, Saturday, and now Sunday, and hadn't seen another human being. No one had come for the backpacks. They just sat there in that outhouse, like some bizarre art installation. Out of curiosity, I checked inside them again. Nothing had changed. The Skittles pack was still full to the brim with candy. I actually counted one layer. There were 27 individual packages just in the top section of the bag. Should we take some? Greg joked, but neither of us touched them. Something about those packs felt almost cursed at that point. On our final day, Monday, we packed up our campsite. I wrote a note saying, "Found your bags, left them here. Call this number if you need help," with my phone number, and left it in a Ziploc bag tucked into one of the regular packs. I don't know why I did that. Part of me was genuinely concerned that someone might be in trouble, that they'd had to abandon their gear for some reason. Before we left, I took photos of the backpacks with my phone. I'm not sure why, maybe as proof that we hadn't imagined the whole thing. The drive back was quiet. We were both exhausted, but also processing the weirdness of what we'd found. Once we had cell service again, Greg suggested we call the local Forest Service office or conservation officers to report what we'd seen. 2 days later, I called the regional conservation office and told them about finding abandoned gear at the site. The officer took notes and seemed mildly interested in the location, but completely unfazed by the Skittles detail. He just said, "We'll look into it," in that way that tells you they definitely won't. When I called back a week later to follow up, a different officer told me they were aware of the report, but had no additional information. I never heard anything more about it. No one ever called the number I left. The conservation officers never contacted me. It's been 3 years, and I still think about those backpacks almost weekly. I've gone down rabbit holes researching missing hikers in the area, none reported around that time. Bizarre cult rituals involving candy, nothing credible. Or whether Skittles are used as some code in drug running, apparently not. Greg and I have discussed going back to see if the packs are still there, but something always stops us. It's like we both know that whatever explanation exists wouldn't be satisfying enough. Or worse, what if we go back and find something even more disturbing? I've told this story to a few friends, and they usually laugh it off as some weird but ultimately explainable thing. But they weren't there. They didn't see how out of place those packs looked, especially that massive bag of Skittles. There was something deeply unsettling about it that I can't fully articulate, like stumbling into someone else's bad dream. Sometimes I catch myself staring at Skittles displays in grocery stores, wondering if I'm missing some connection. I haven't been able to eat them since that trip. The rational part of my brain says there's probably some mundane explanation. Maybe some teenagers playing a prank, or someone hiding stolen merchandise, or just some eccentric hiker with a serious sweet tooth. But none of those explanations seem to fit all the details. Why 3 high-end backpacks? Why leave them in an outhouse instead of hiding them elsewhere? Why was one filled exclusively with Skittles? And most importantly, why did no one ever come back for them? I still have the photos on my phone. Sometimes I look at them just to remind myself that it really happened, that somewhere out there, the mystery of the Skittles backpack remains unsolved. Story 6. I've been sitting on this story for months now, debating whether to share it. Part of me worries that putting this out there might make things worse, but I need to tell someone about it. I still haven't fully processed what happened that day in the desert, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to know the whole truth. Growing up Mexican-American in Arizona, I always knew there were gaps in what I understood about my family history. My dad's side was an open book. Grandfather worked construction. Grandmother was a teacher. They moved to the U.S. in the 70s for better opportunities. But my mom's past? That was like trying to see through brick wall. Whenever I'd ask about her life back in Mexico, she'd get this distant look and give these vague answers about her hometown near the border. "It was different times, mijo," she'd say, or, "That's all in the past now." The only thing she ever said with any consistency was this weird joke about her family, that one side were politicians and the other were criminals, but she could never tell which was which. She'd laugh it off like it was nothing, but there was always something uncomfortable behind that smile. The only other clue I had was a name. I'll just call it R here. I was maybe 14 when I heard it the first time. I got up late one night to get water and found Mom in the kitchen, talking in hushed, rapid Spanish on our landline. She kept saying this name R over and over, and the tone in her voice. It wasn't fear exactly, but something intense I'd never heard from her before. When she noticed me standing there, she ended the call immediately. "Go back to bed," she said, with a look that made my stomach drop. We never talked about it. For years, I pushed these questions aside. I got through high school, went to college at ASU, and tried to focus on building my own life. Mom seemed happy with Dad. working as a receptionist at a dental office, making tamales that put everyone else's to shame during holidays. Whatever her past was, maybe it was better left there. Until last spring break, I was heading to meet my college buddy Carlos at his family's place in Santa Fe. It was about a 10-hour drive, and I'd planned to do it all in one shot. My old Honda Civic wasn't the most comfortable ride, but it had decent AC and a working radio, which was all I needed. I started early, around 6 in the morning, figuring I'd get there before dinner. About 4 hours into the drive, I was on this long stretch of highway cutting through the desert, red rocks, scrubby bushes, and not much else for miles, the kind of emptiness that makes you feel small. I hadn't passed another car in at least 20 minutes when my mom called. It was a normal call at first. She was checking in, and we got talking about the Cardinals' draft picks. Mom's a huge football fan, something that always surprised people who didn't know her well. We were deep in debate about whether they needed a better offensive line when I noticed something up ahead. There was what looked like a checkpoint on the road, orange cones narrowing the highway to one lane, and a couple of vehicles parked on the shoulder. My first thought was Border Patrol, which wasn't unusual in that area. But as I got closer, something felt off. The cars weren't marked with any official logos, just a dark SUV and a dusty pickup truck. "Mom, there's some kind of roadblock ahead," I said, slowing down. "I'm gonna call you back." "What kind of roadblock?" She sounded instantly concerned. "Where exactly are you?" I told her roughly where I was, somewhere north of Phoenix, heading toward Flagstaff, when 3 men stepped out from beside the vehicles. They weren't wearing uniforms, just jeans, boots, and button-up shirts. 2 of them had sunglasses on despite the cloudy day, and they were all wearing baseball caps pulled low. "I gotta go, Mom. I'll call you back," I said, but I didn't hang up. Instead, I just put the phone down on the passenger seat as I rolled to a stop. Looking back, I don't know why I didn't end the call. Maybe some instinct told me not to. The men approached my car from different angles, one coming to my window, one to the passenger side, and one staying slightly behind my car. The guy who reached my window knocked on the glass with what I realized was a pistol. My heart was hammering against my ribs as I rolled the window down. "Where are you heading?" he asked in English, but with a heavy accent. He was probably in his 30s, with a mustache and a scar by his right eyebrow. "Santa Fe," I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Visiting a friend." He nodded like this was exactly what he expected to hear. "Step out of the car, please." I hesitated, and he tapped the window frame with his gun again, not threatening exactly, but definitely not patient. I got out slowly, my legs feeling weak beneath me. "Hands where I can see them," the guy said, and I raised them to shoulder level. The second man had circled around and was now standing next to the first. He was younger, maybe mid-20s, with a face that looked like it hadn't seen enough sun, despite living in the desert. "Wallet," the first man said, holding out his hand. I slowly reached for my back pocket, pulled out my wallet and handed it over. He flipped it open, examining my driver's license. "Martinez," he read my last name aloud. "You Mexican?" "Mexican-American," I said. "Born here." He nodded again, taking the $60 I had in cash before handing the empty wallet back to me. The younger guy was looking through my backpack now, which had been on the back seat. He pulled out my laptop and examined it before setting it on the hood of my car. "Phone," the first man said. I froze. "It's in the car." The third man, who had been mostly hanging back, now moved toward my car door. He was older than the others, maybe in his 50s, with silver streaking through his black hair. When he opened the passenger door and saw my phone on the seat, I remembered with a jolt that the call with my mom was still connected. He picked up the phone, glanced at the screen, and then put it to his ear. There was a long pause, and then he started speaking in Spanish. I could only catch bits and pieces. My Spanish was decent but not fluent. But I definitely heard him say, "Su hijo," your son, and then that name again, R. The conversation went on for what felt like forever, but was probably less than a minute. The older man's expression changed from confusion to something like recognition, and finally to what almost looked like respect. He ended the call and walked over to where I was standing with the other two men. He said something to them in Spanish that was too quick for me to catch. The first man looked at me with new eyes, then at the older man as if confirming something. The younger one immediately started putting my stuff back in my car. "There has been a misunderstanding," the older man said to me in English. His accent was thicker than the first man's. "You are free to go." "What?" I couldn't help asking. "What's going on?" He handed my phone back to me, and I saw that the call had ended. "Your mother and I have a mutual acquaintance," he said simply, "from many years ago." The first man handed back my wallet, still minus the cash, and shrugged. "Tax for the inconvenience," he said with a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. Within minutes, they had removed enough cones for me to drive through. As I slowly pulled away, I watched in my rearview mirror as they quickly packed up the rest of their makeshift checkpoint and got in their vehicles. I drove about 15 miles, hands shaking on the steering wheel, before pulling over at a gas station to call my mom back. She answered on the first ring. "Are you okay?" Her voice was tight with worry. "Yeah, I'm okay," I said, still trying to process what had happened. "Mom, what just happened? Those guys let me go after talking to you." There was a pause. "I just told them I'd call the police. I knew where you were, so they knew they couldn't get away with anything." It was such an obvious lie. The police wouldn't have reached us for at least half an hour, and these guys clearly weren't worried about cops. And how would a threat from my dental receptionist mother make armed men back down? "Mom," I said slowly. "They mentioned a name. R. The same name I heard you say on the phone that night years ago." The silence stretched so long I thought we'd lost connection. "Mom? Some things are better left in the past, mijo," she finally said. Her voice had that same intensity I'd heard that night in our kitchen. "I'm just glad you're safe. Call me when you get to Carlos's house." She hung up, and I sat there in the gas station parking lot for a long time, trying to make sense of things. Those weren't random bandits. They were organized, deliberate. And somehow, my mother, who baked cookies for my elementary school classes and cried at cheesy Hallmark movies, had enough connection to them that merely mentioning a name could guarantee my safety. I ended up driving to Carlos's place like nothing had happened. What was I supposed to say? "Hey man, I think my mom might have cartel connections." I kept it to myself, finished spring break playing video games and hiking, and went back to school. It's been 6 months, and I still haven't confronted my mom about what really happened. Part of me wants answers, to know who R is, to understand what my mother did before she came to the U.S., to learn what kind of power she still holds over people like those men in the desert. But another part of me is terrified of what those answers might be. If I pull at this thread, what else might unravel? What dangerous world might I be dragging myself into? And would knowing the truth change how I see the woman who raised me? For now, I've decided to leave it alone. But sometimes I catch my mom looking at me with this worried expression. like she's afraid I'll ask questions she doesn't want to answer. And when news about cartel violence near the border comes on TV, she always finds a reason to leave the room. I don't know what to do with this knowledge, or lack of knowledge. All I know is that the line in her joke about politicians and criminals being indistinguishable doesn't seem so funny anymore. Story 7. I still wake up in the middle of the night sometimes, my heart racing like crazy, thinking I hear tapping from the hallway. It's been 3 years since we sold the house in Maplewood, but I swear those sounds follow me. I'm not someone who believes in ghosts or anything supernatural, but what happened in that old Victorian home has left me questioning everything I thought I knew about reality. We bought the house when I was pregnant with Thomas, our first son. It was built in the late 1800s, with those high ceilings and creaky wooden floors that make every footstep echo. My husband Mark fell in love with the crown molding and original woodwork, while I was drawn to the large bay windows that let in so much natural light. The previous owners had renovated the kitchen and bathrooms, but much of the house remained untouched for decades. We'd occasionally find old newspapers stuffed in walls for insulation, or peculiar trinkets left behind in the attic, but nothing that ever raised any red flags. Thomas was such an easy baby. He slept through the night by 3 months, rarely fussed, and hit all his developmental milestones right on schedule. Everything was perfectly normal until he turned 8. That's when the sleepwalking started. I've always been a light sleeper. The slightest noise wakes me up. So the first time it happened, I heard his bedroom door creak open down the hall. At first, I thought he was just getting up to use the bathroom, but when I didn't hear the toilet flush after a few minutes, I got worried and went to check on him. There he was, standing outside our bedroom door, completely still except for a slight rocking motion, shifting his weight from heel to toe. His eyes were open but vacant, like he was looking at something 1,000 miles away. When I whispered his name, he didn't respond. "Thomas, honey," I said, touching his shoulder gently. His skin felt ice cold despite the warm June night. It took a few more tries before he finally blinked and seemed to wake up, confused about why. He was standing in the hallway. The pediatrician assured us this was normal. "Many children sleepwalk," she explained at his next checkup. "He'll likely outgrow it by puberty. Just make sure he doesn't hurt himself." So we installed a baby gate at the top of the stairs and a bell on his door so I'd hear him if he got up. For the next several months, it became almost routine. 2 or 3 nights a week, I'd wake to the soft jingle of the bell, find Thomas wandering around upstairs, and gently guide him back to bed. Sometimes he'd mumble things I couldn't understand, his voice flat and emotionless. Other times, he'd just stare silently into space. About 6 months into this phase, something changed. I woke up around 2 in the morning to a different sound, a rhythmic tapping that echoed through the upstairs hallway. Tap, 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 steady and persistent. When I went to investigate, I found Thomas facing the wall about halfway down the hallway, slowly and deliberately tapping his forehead against the floral wallpaper. His fingertips were brushing against the surface in perfect sync with the movement of his head, like he was trying to feel for something specific. I still remember the chill that ran through me. There was something so methodical, so intentional about his movements. It wasn't like he was confused or lost in a dream. It felt like he was performing some kind of ritual. "Thomas," I whispered, placing my hand between his forehead and the wall to prevent him from hitting it again. "Wake up, sweetheart." His eyes slowly focused on me, and for a split second, I swear I saw someone else looking back at me through my son's eyes. Then he blinked, and he was just my little boy again, confused and sleepy. "Mom?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. "What's happening?" "You were sleepwalking again," I told him, leading him back to his room. "Do you remember what you were dreaming about?" He shook his head, already half asleep again as I tucked him in. "There was someone in the mirror," he mumbled, before drifting off completely. I stood frozen by his bedside for a long time, trying to make sense of what he'd said. There wasn't a mirror in the hallway where he'd been standing. This wall-tapping behavior continued on and off for another year. Always the same spot in the hallway, always the same rhythmic motion. Sometimes he'd whisper things while doing it, fragments of sentences I couldn't quite piece together. "They're watching," or "let me through," or "I can see you." By the time Thomas turned 10, the sleepwalking stopped completely. When Daniel was born a few years later, Thomas had no memory of his nighttime wanderings. We'd occasionally mention it as a funny family story. "Remember how you used to sleepwalk and we'd find you in the strangest places?" But he'd just shrug it off. Life moved on. Thomas became a teenager, focused on soccer and video games. I almost forgot about those unsettling nights until Daniel turned 8. It started exactly the same way. The creaking door, the soft footsteps in the hallway. The first time I found him standing outside our bedroom, I felt a wave of déjà vu so strong it made me dizzy. He was rocking slightly on his heels, staring blankly ahead, just as Thomas had done. "Must be genetic," Mark suggested when I told him the next morning. "My brother used to sleepwalk too." I wanted to believe that. I really did. But something felt off about the whole situation. You see, Daniel's sleepwalking wasn't just similar to Thomas's. It was identical. He would stand in the exact same spot in the hallway. He would shift his weight from foot to foot in the exact same pattern. And within 6 months, he too began the wall-tapping ritual, pressing his forehead against the precise location where Thomas had done so years earlier. What bothered me most was that Daniel had been a toddler when Thomas was sleepwalking. He couldn't possibly have witnessed or remembered his older brother's behavior to mimic it so perfectly. Yet, there he was, night after night, drawn to that same spot on the wall. One night, I found Daniel with his palms flat against the wallpaper, forehead pressed to the surface, whispering, "I can see you in there. Let me in." "Daniel," I said, my voice shaking, "who are you talking to?" He turned to look at me, but his eyes were unfocused. "The people in the mirror," he said matter-of-factly. "They want me to come through." I remember standing there, my blood turning to ice in my veins. The same mention of a mirror where no mirror existed. I took photos of the wall the next day in the exact spot where both boys had been drawn to. I examined every inch of it, looking for anything unusual, a different texture, a hidden compartment, anything that might explain their fixation. But it was just wallpaper over plaster, unremarkable in every way. Like his brother, Daniel eventually outgrew the sleepwalking. By his 10th birthday, the episodes had stopped completely. Both boys grew up, and the strange behavior became a distant memory as they moved on to high school, then college. When Thomas left for university and Daniel was in his senior year of high school, Mark and I decided it was finally time to renovate the upstairs hallway. The floral wallpaper had become faded and peeling in places, and we wanted to freshen up the space. It was a Saturday in October. Daniel was at a friend's house for the weekend, and Mark and I were working together to strip the old wallpaper. We'd been at it for hours, the radio playing softly in the background as we chatted about mundane things, bills, retirement plans, whether we should visit Thomas during his upcoming fall break. I was working on that specific section of the hallway wall, the exact spot where both my sons had been drawn to during their sleepwalking episodes. The wallpaper was stubborn there, refusing to come off in clean strips. As I sprayed more removal solution and scraped carefully, I noticed something different about the surface, beneath. "Mark," I called, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears. "Can you come look at this?" He stepped over, wiping his hands on his jeans. "What's up? Does this look like—" I couldn't even finish the sentence. As we peeled away more of the wallpaper, our suspicions were confirmed. Behind the decades-old covering was a mirror, an antique mirror with an ornate silver frame built directly into the wall. It had been completely covered up by at least 2 layers of wallpaper, hidden for what must have been generations. The mirror was positioned exactly where both Thomas and Daniel had pressed their foreheads during their sleepwalking episodes. The spot they had been drawn to night after night, where they would tap and whisper to the people in the mirror. I stared at my reflection, my face pale with shock. How could they have known? How could both my sons, in their sleep, have been drawn to a mirror they couldn't possibly have known existed? Mark laughed nervously. "Well, that's pretty weird, huh? Maybe they heard hollow sounds when they knocked?" But we both knew that didn't make sense. The mirror wasn't making any different sound than the rest of the wall. There was no logical explanation for why 2 sleepwalking children, years apart, would be drawn to the exact location of a hidden mirror. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all those nights, all those strange whispers. The people in the mirror. "Let me in. I can see you." Had they actually seen something in that covered mirror? Something only visible to children in a sleepwalking state? The next morning, I went back to examine it more closely. The mirror itself looked ancient. The silver backing was tarnished in places, creating dark spots across its surface. As I stood there looking at my reflection, I noticed something odd. When I moved, there was a slight delay before my reflection followed. Just a fraction of a second, but enough to make me doubt my own senses. We removed the mirror that same day. Mark thought I was overreacting, but he helped me pry it from the wall and take it to the dump anyway. I couldn't bear the thought of it remaining in our home, not after everything that had happened. That should have been the end of it. A strange coincidence explained away, a creepy old mirror disposed of. But 3 weeks later, Daniel came home from school and walked straight to that spot in the hallway. He stood there, staring at the newly painted wall. "What happened to the mirror?" he asked. My blood ran cold. "What mirror, honey?" He blinked, looking confused. "I don't know why I asked that. There wasn't a mirror here, was there?" He had no conscious memory of his sleepwalking episodes. He had never known about the mirror behind the wallpaper, yet somehow he sensed its absence. We sold the house 6 months later. I told Mark it was because we were empty nesters who didn't need so much space, but the truth is, I couldn't stand being there anymore. Sometimes at night, I'd wake up thinking I heard tapping coming from the hallway. Tap, tap, tap. And once, just once, I thought I saw a face in that wall. Not my reflection, since the mirror was gone, but someone else, watching me from the other side. I still don't have an explanation for what happened. How did both my sons know about a mirror that had been hidden for decades? What were they seeing in it during their sleepwalking episodes? And why did they stop at exactly the same age? Some questions don't have answers, I guess, but I still check behind the wallpaper whenever we stay in old houses, just in case. Story 8. I don't usually talk about this. It's been 7 years, but even typing this out makes my hands shake a little. I guess I need to get it off my chest, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar. Growing up in Black Ridge meant finding your own entertainment. Our town had one movie theater that showed films months after release, a bowling alley with 3 working lanes, and more churches than restaurants. My friends and I, Marcus, Josh, Lena, and me, Taylor, we were drawn to Crescent Hill Cemetery. I know how that sounds. Teenagers hanging out in a graveyard seems like typical edgy behavior, but it wasn't about disrespect. There was something peaceful about that place. We'd sit on these massive moss-covered headstones from the 1800s, watching fireflies and telling stories. Sometimes we'd bring flashlights and wander through the older section, reading epitaphs and making up stories about the people buried there. Last autumn, on October 18th, everything changed. The night started like any other. We met up around 9:30, sneaking in through the gap in the fence behind the groundskeeper's shed. The cemetery was different in fall. Leaves crunched beneath our feet, and the air had that distinct smell of decay and earth. That night, though, the atmosphere felt heavier somehow. The darkness seemed thicker between the trees, almost like it was watching us. "This place gives me the creeps tonight," Lena said, pulling her jacket tighter. "That's the point," Marcus replied, flicking on his flashlight under his chin to make that classic horror movie face. We settled into our usual spot, a small clearing surrounded by 4 massive headstones that we used as seats. Josh pulled out a flask of something he'd stolen from his dad's liquor cabinet, and we passed it around. The alcohol burned my throat, but I welcomed the warmth as the temperature dropped. Josh was in the middle of some story about a hitchhiker ghost when I first noticed it. I kept getting this weird feeling, like someone was watching me from the older section of the cemetery. That part was at least 100 years old, with tilted headstones and above-ground crypts. Most of it was hidden in shadow. I tried to focus on Josh's story, but my eyes kept drifting back to that spot, and then I saw it. Movement where there shouldn't be any. At first I thought it was just shadows playing tricks, maybe branches swaying in the wind, but there wasn't any wind. What I saw next still makes my stomach turn when I think about it. A figure, definitely human-shaped, was rising from one of the flat graves, not like someone standing up from sitting. This was different. It was like the ground itself was pushing something out. The figure moved jerkily, unnaturally, like its joints weren't working right. It wasn't smooth. Each movement seemed deliberate, mechanical almost. "Guys," I whispered, grabbing Marcus's arm. "Look over there." I pointed toward the old section. The figure was fully upright now, tall and hunched over. It stood completely still for a moment before taking a step. That step, God, that step, it was all wrong. Like its foot was being dragged forward by something else, not like natural walking at all. "What the fuck is that?" Marcus whispered, so they could see it too. This wasn't in my head. "Is someone messing with us?" Lena asked, her voice higher than normal. The figure began moving toward the back gate of the cemetery, taking slow, deliberate steps. Each movement looked painful, forced. Josh stood up. "Hey!" he called out, his voice cracking. "Shut up!" I hissed, yanking him back down. The figure stopped. Then slowly, it turned toward us. I couldn't make out a face, just a dark silhouette against the slightly less dark background. But I knew somehow that it was looking directly at us. We all froze. Nobody breathed. The figure remained motionless for what felt like minutes. Then it started moving again, not toward the gate anymore, but straight toward us. "Run," Marcus said quietly. Then louder, "Run!" We scattered, dropping everything. I sprinted toward the main entrance, not caring about getting caught anymore. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. The others were right behind me, except for Josh, who had been sitting closest to where the figure was approaching. I glanced back once. The figure was moving faster now, still with that unnatural gait, and Josh was stumbling, falling behind. I stopped, screaming his name. He looked terrified, his face pale in the moonlight, but he managed to catch up to us. We didn't stop running until we reached the gas station 3 blocks away. We stood in the fluorescent lighting, gasping for breath, checking to make sure we were all there. Josh looked awful. His skin was clammy and gray, and he was shivering despite sweating profusely. "Did you guys see that?" Lena kept asking. "Tell me you all saw that." We did. We had all seen the same thing. Josh got sick that night. Really sick. His mom called mine the next morning saying he had a fever of 104. It lasted 3 days. The doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. They said it was probably just a virus, but the timing was too perfect to be coincidence. For weeks afterward, we avoided talking about what happened. We stopped hanging out at the cemetery. Actually, we barely hung out at all. It was like we were afraid that speaking about it would somehow make it real, would confirm that we had actually seen what we thought we saw. About a month later, Marcus showed up at my house with a newspaper clipping. His dad worked for the local paper, and he'd found something. "You need to see this," he said, handing me the paper. It was a small article from the community section titled "Local Man Found Sleeping in Cemetery." According to the article, the groundskeeper had been finding evidence of someone entering the cemetery at night. They eventually caught a man, Harold Winters, 67 years old, sleeping beside a grave. The grave belonged to his wife, who had died earlier that year. "So it was just some old guy?" I asked, relief flooding through me. "That's what we saw?" Marcus nodded, but he didn't look convinced. "Maybe." I called Lena and Josh, and we all met up at the diner downtown. I showed them the article, expecting everyone to feel the same relief I had felt. "That doesn't make sense," Josh said immediately. He looked better physically, but there was something different about him now. Quieter, more serious. "That thing we saw wasn't just some old man. It came out of the ground, Taylor." "Maybe we just saw him getting up," I suggested, desperately wanting this rational explanation to work. "No," Lena shook her head. "You saw how it moved. That wasn't human movement." "People can move strangely," Marcus said, though he didn't sound convinced either, especially older people with joint problems. We sat in silence for a while. "I think we should go back," Josh said finally. "Are you insane?" Lena almost shouted. "Not at night," he clarified. "During the day, we should find the grave it came from." Part of me never wanted to set foot in that cemetery again, but another part needed answers. So the next Saturday, in broad daylight, we returned to Crescent Hill. The cemetery looked different in daylight, less mysterious, more sad. Rows of stones marking lives ended, dreams unfulfilled. We made our way to the older section where we'd seen the figure rise. "It was around here," I said, pointing to a cluster of flat graves. We spread out, examining the area. The grass looked normal, the graves undisturbed. Then Josh called us over. "Look at this," he said, pointing to one grave. The headstone read, "Elizabeth Winters, beloved wife, 1949 to 2016. The earth around the grave showed signs of being recently disturbed, not dug up, but like someone had been lying on it repeatedly. There were also wilted flowers and a framed photo of an elderly couple. "This must be her," Marcus said. "Harold's wife." It should have made me feel better. There was our explanation, a grieving widower visiting his wife's grave, possibly lying down next to her in his grief. We'd seen him getting up, illuminated strangely by moonlight, and our imaginations had done the rest. But something still didn't sit right. The grave we were standing at was in the newer section of the cemetery, not the older part where we'd seen the figure emerge. And the movement we'd witnessed, that unnatural rising from the ground, it wasn't something I could rationalize away. On our way out, we ran into the groundskeeper, an older man named Frank, who knew us from our frequent visits. Instead of scolding us, he just looked tired. "Back again?" he asked. "Thought you kids had finally outgrown this place." "We heard about the man who was sleeping here," Lena said. "Harold Winters?" Frank's face softened. Poor Harold. 50 years they were married. Some people just can't let go. "Have you seen him recently?" I asked. "Not for a couple weeks now," Frank replied. "His daughter came and got him, taking him to live with her in Arizona. Doctor said he needed help, mentally, you know. Grief can do terrible things to a person." We thanked him and left, each lost in our own thoughts. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing that figure rising from the ground, its jerky, unnatural movements. I tried to superimpose the image of a grieving old man over that memory, but it wouldn't fit. The thing we saw wasn't human, or if it was, grief had transformed it into something else entirely. I've thought a lot about that night over the years, about how loss can change a person, make them unrecognizable even to themselves, about how the line between the living and the dead isn't always as clear as we think. Sometimes I wonder if what we saw was Harold at all. Maybe it was just his grief taking physical form, or maybe it was something else entirely, something that had been there long before Harold started visiting his wife, something that knew how to take advantage of our fear. I don't have answers. None of us do. Josh eventually moved away for college and rarely comes back to Blackridge. Marcus and Lena still live here, but we don't talk about that night anymore. Some things are better left buried. But sometimes when I drive past Crescent Hill Cemetery at dusk, I find myself slowing down, scanning the older section for movement. And I wonder if Harold ever found peace, or if part of him is still there, rising from the earth each night, caught in that endless space between living and letting go. Story 9. I still don't sleep with my window open, not after what happened 12 years ago. Sometimes I think about reaching out to my parents about it, but I know they'd just tell me to move on. They always do. But how do you move on from something you can't explain? I was 12 when we moved to rural Louisiana. My dad got this job offer he couldn't refuse. Better pay, benefits, the whole package. The catch? We had to leave our comfortable suburban neighborhood for literally the middle of nowhere. I remember pulling up to our new house for the first time and feeling my stomach drop. This old 2-story wooden house that creaked with every gust of wind, surrounded by dense forest on all sides. Our nearest neighbor was half a mile away. Half a mile. "It'll be an adventure," Mom kept saying. "Think of all the exploring you can do." But all I could think about was leaving my friends behind. No more bike rides to the corner store. No more neighborhood kids to hang out with. Just trees. Endless trees. The first week wasn't terrible. I spent most of my time unpacking and helping my parents organize. Rusty, our golden retriever, seemed to love the open space at first. He'd run around the yard, tail wagging, sniffing everything. But then something changed. It started with hesitation. Rusty would stop at the edge of our yard, hackles raised, staring into the woods. At first, we thought he spotted a squirrel or maybe a deer. But then he started refusing to go out at night altogether. He'd plant his feet at the door, whining and backing away. My mom said he was just adjusting, but I'd never seen Rusty act like this before. Then the barking started. Not regular barking. This was different, frantic, desperate. Always around 3 in the morning, always directed at the tree line beyond our backyard. My dad started getting up to check, but he never found anything. After a week of interrupted sleep, even he was getting concerned. Probably just wildlife, he'd mutter. But I could tell he wasn't convinced. It was on a Saturday morning in early October when we met Nolan. Dad and I were stacking firewood near the shed when he approached from the direction of the main road. I didn't hear him coming. He just appeared at the edge of our property. "Morning," he called out. "Thought I'd come introduce myself." He looked to be in his 60s, with thinning gray hair and these pale blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He walked with a slight limp, favoring his left leg. Something about him instantly made me uncomfortable. Dad stood up, wiping his hands on his jeans. "John Walker," he said, extending his hand. "This is my son, Ethan." Nolan's handshake was too firm, the kind that feels like a power move. "Nolan," he replied, not offering a last name. "Live down the way." He gestured vaguely toward the road. His sentences were clipped, like he was rationing words, and his eyes. They kept calculating, moving from Dad to me, to the house, to Rusty, who was watching from the porch, unusually still, then back to Dad. "Nice dog," Nolan said, but Rusty started growling, something he never did. "Protective." The conversation was brief and awkward. Nolan asked about where we moved from, how we liked Louisiana so far. Normal questions, but something felt off about the way he asked them, like he was gathering information rather than making conversation. Before leaving, he looked directly at me. "You're going to like it here, Ethan," he said. "Lots of places to explore." I hadn't told him my name. Dad had only said it once, in passing, not directly to Nolan. After he left, Dad turned to me. "Stay away from him, all right?" I nodded, relieved Dad felt it too. "Who is he?" "Don't know, but something's not right there." That night was when it all escalated. Rusty's barking woke me around 3:15 in the morning. Not his usual barking, this was frenzied, panicked. I went to my window and pulled back the curtain just enough to peek outside. The moon was bright enough to see our yard clearly. Rusty was at the back door, barking toward the woods, practically throwing himself against the glass. And then I saw movement at the tree line. At first, I thought it was just shadows playing tricks on my eyes. But no, something was moving there. Someone. I squinted, trying to make out details, and then the figure stepped into a patch of moonlight. Nolan. But not the Nolan we'd met earlier. This Nolan looked wrong. His skin was ashen, almost gray in the moonlight. His eyes looked hollow, like deep pits in his face. And he was smiling, this terrible twisted grin that seemed too wide for his face. He just stood there, staring at our house. Then, as if sensing me watching, he turned his head and looked directly at my window. I swear to God, I heard my name. Not shouted, not even spoken aloud, but whispered, somehow, right in my ear. "Ethan." I jerked back from the window, heart pounding. When I found the courage to look again seconds later, he was gone. Just gone. I ran to my parents' room, practically in tears. Dad grabbed his flashlight and went outside to check, despite Mom begging him not to. He came back 20 minutes later, looking confused and unsettled. "Nothing out there," he said. "No footprints, no sign anyone was there." I knew what I saw, and Rusty knew too. He wouldn't stop pacing and whining all night. The next day, Dad drove into town and asked around about Nolan. This is where things get even more disturbing. Nobody knew who he was talking about. There was no Nolan registered in the county records, no one matching his description living down the way, as he'd claimed. Our actual nearest neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Thibodeau, had lived there 40 years and never heard of anyone named Nolan matching his description. Dad came home looking pale. "We're leaving," he announced to Mom in the kitchen. They thought I couldn't hear them from the stairs, but I did. "I don't know what's going on here, but I'm not risking our safety to find out. I'll call work tomorrow, tell them something came up." Mom didn't even argue. That's how I knew they were truly scared. We spent that night packing essential items. Dad said we'd come back for the rest once we were settled somewhere else. We were going to leave first thing in the morning, drive to my grandparents' house in Texas. That last night was the worst. I couldn't sleep, just kept staring at my bedroom window, afraid of what I might see. When I finally did drift off, I had the most vivid nightmare. In the dream, I woke to someone whispering my name. Nolan was standing at my bedside, that same twisted smile on his face, those hollow eyes staring down at me. His skin looked paper thin, with dark veins visible underneath. He reached out one bony hand toward my face. "I've been waiting for someone like you, Ethan," he whispered. His voice sounded wrong, like multiple voices layered together. "This house has been empty too long." I tried to scream, but couldn't make a sound. That's when I noticed something behind him, shadows moving independently of him, gathering in the corners of my room. They weren't normal shadows. They seemed alive, pulsating. "We all wait here," Nolan continued, "and now you'll wait with us." I woke up gasping for air, tangled in sweat-soaked sheets. Dawn was just breaking. I didn't wait. I grabbed my pre-packed bag and ran to my parents' room. They were already up, loading the car. We left as the sun was rising. Rusty seemed to know we were escaping. He jumped into the car without hesitation, something he never did. As we pulled away from the house, I looked back one last time. There, at my bedroom window, was a face. Just for a split second, pale, gaunt, those hollow eyes staring out at me. Then it was gone. Dad drove non-stop for 6 hours. We never went back for our things. Dad hired a company to pack everything up and sell the house. We never talked about what happened, not really. Mom would change the subject, and Dad would get this distant look in his eyes. I tried researching the house's history years later. Turns out it had been empty for nearly a decade before we moved in. The previous owners left suddenly too, according to local rumors. Before them, a family in the 70s stayed only 3 months. I found an old newspaper article about a man named Nolan Devereux who disappeared in those woods in 1942. The photo was grainy, black and white, but those eyes, I recognized them instantly. They found his body 3 weeks later in the foundation of a house being built, our house. The article suggested he'd fallen in accidentally, but mentioned unusual circumstances. What those circumstances were, it never said. Sometimes when I'm alone at night, I still hear my name being whispered. I've moved 7 times since Louisiana, but it doesn't matter. Distance doesn't seem to affect it. On particularly bad nights, I see shadows moving in the corners of my room, gathering, watching. Rusty never barked at night again after we left. He lived to be 14, but he always got anxious around October. He'd stare at empty corners of whatever room we were in, tracking something with his eyes that none of us could see. I'm 24 now. I still check all my window locks twice before bed. I still sleep with the lights on when those whispers get too loud. And I still wonder what would have happened if we'd stayed one more night in that house in rural Louisiana. Because sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see Nolan's face, that twisted smile, those hollow eyes, and I know he's still waiting. Story 10. I've been debating whether to share this for a long time. It's been almost 3 years since my mom passed away, and I still can't make sense of what happened during my teenage years. I guess I'm hoping someone here might have experienced something similar, or can offer some explanation that doesn't make me feel like I'm going crazy. I grew up in Pinecrest, this tiny speck of a town in rural Georgia where everyone knows everyone's business. My family was Southern Baptist, the kind where church wasn't just on Sundays but pretty much governed our entire lives. My dad and grandparents were hardcore believers. Demons were absolutely real to them, lurking around every corner, ready to tempt you into sin. But ghosts? That was New Age nonsense, according to my grandmother. My mom, Mary Ann, was different. She'd go to church with us, but she always had this way of dismissing the fire and brimstone stuff with a little wave of her hand. God and I have an understanding, she'd say, whenever my grandmother started in on her about missing Wednesday service or not volunteering for the church bake sale. It drove my grandmother crazy. What nobody really talked about was that my mom wasn't well. Looking back now as an adult, I can see she was struggling with serious mental health issues and probably self-medicating with whatever she could get her hands on. Pills, alcohol, sometimes both. But mental health wasn't something people in Pinecrest discussed openly in the early 2000s. If you were sad, you prayed about it. If you were anxious, you needed more faith. Simple as that. Living with Mom was like walking on eggshells. Some days she'd be fine, making pancakes shaped like animals and singing along to the radio. Other days she'd be a completely different person, paranoid, angry, saying things that made no sense. I never knew which version of her I'd get when I came home from school. I was 15 when the really strange stuff started happening. The first incident is still so vivid in my memory, it makes me shudder. I had fallen asleep doing homework on my bed one afternoon. In my dream, I heard my bedroom door slam open. My mom burst in, her face twisted with rage. "Where is it?" she screamed, grabbing my wrist so hard I felt my bones grinding together. Her fingernails dug into my skin as she yanked me upright. "Don't lie to me!" I woke up gasping, my heart racing. "Just a nightmare," I told myself, rubbing my wrist which still seemed to ache from her grip. Then my bedroom door slammed open. My mom stood there, her face contorted with the exact same rage I'd just seen in my dream. "Where is it?" she screamed, the words identical to what I'd just heard in my sleep. She lunged forward, grabbed my wrist, the same one from the dream, and yanked me upright, her nails digging into the exact same spots that still tingled from the nightmare. "Don't lie to me!" I was too shocked to respond. She was ranting about her prescription bottle, accusing me of hiding it. I hadn't touched her pills, but she was absolutely convinced I had. The whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still dreaming, except the pain in my wrist was definitely real. Eventually she stormed out, and I sat there trembling, my mind racing. How had I dreamed the exact scene minutes before it happened? It wasn't just similar, it was identical. Same words, same expressions, same everything. The next morning, Mom was making coffee like nothing had happened. I worked up the courage to ask her about yesterday. She looked at me with genuine confusion. "What are you talking about, sweetie? I didn't come into your room yesterday." When I showed her the marks on my wrist, she seemed concerned and suggested maybe I'd done it to myself in my sleep. I tried to convince myself it was just a weird coincidence. Maybe I'd heard her coming up the stairs in my sleep and incorporated it into my dream. Maybe she didn't remember because of the pills she was taking. There had to be a logical explanation. A few weeks went by normally, or as normal as things ever got in our house. Then came the snake incident. I was doing dishes one Saturday afternoon when I heard excited screaming from our backyard. Not scared screaming, the kind of shouting that sounds almost joyful. I ran outside and stopped dead in my tracks. My mother was standing in the middle of our overgrown lawn, holding a massive snake with her bare hands. It had to be at least 7 feet long, thick as my arm, writhing around as she gripped it behind its head. And she was laughing. Here's the thing. My mom was absolutely terrified of snakes. I mean phobic to the point where she couldn't even look at pictures of them in my science textbooks. She'd once made us leave a state park when someone mentioned they'd spotted a garden snake on one of the trails. This fear wasn't just a dislike. It was debilitating. But there she was, holding this monster snake, looking more alive and excited than I'd seen her in years. When she spotted me, her face lit up. "Eliza, look what I found. Isn't she beautiful?" Her voice was strange, higher pitched than normal, almost childlike. "Come take her. She wants to meet you." She stretched her arms out toward me, the snake still writhing. What scared me most wasn't the snake itself, but my mother's eyes. They didn't look right. It wasn't the dilated pupils of someone on drugs. I'd seen those before. It was like nobody was home behind them, like something else was looking out through my mother's eyes. I backed away slowly, mumbling something about needing to finish the dishes. She kept grinning at me, holding out the snake until I made it back inside. I locked the door and called my dad at work, but by the time he got home 2 hours later, Mom was watching TV like nothing had happened. The snake was gone. When Dad asked her about it, she looked completely bewildered. "A snake? Are you kidding me? You know I can't even look at those things without having a panic attack." She turned to me, hurt and angry. "Why would you make up something like that, Eliza? Is this because I wouldn't let you go to Amber's party?" I insisted it had happened, described exactly what I'd seen, but she just got more upset. Eventually she said, "You must have dreamed it. Or maybe you need to stop watching those horror movies. They're putting ideas in your head." Dad pulled me aside later and suggested maybe I'd misunderstood what I saw, or maybe Mom was sleepwalking. But I knew what I'd seen, and I knew my mother, terrified of snakes her entire life, could not have faked that comfort with a massive snake in her hands. The third incident was the one that still gives me nightmares. It happened when I was 16, during our church's winter youth lock-in. These were overnight events where the teenagers would stay at the chapel for prayer, games, and Bible study. My mom had been having a rough few weeks, so Dad thought it would be good for me to get out of the house. Everything was normal until about 4:30 in the morning. Most of us were half asleep in our sleeping bags in the main chapel when we heard knocking. Not just normal knocking, this was a deliberate, slow pattern. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks. It seemed to move around the building, like someone was circling the chapel, knocking on different doors and windows. Pastor Mike went to check the main entrance, and some of the other adult chaperones checked the side doors. Nothing, but the knocking continued, somehow seeming to come from multiple directions at once. When Pastor Mike finally opened the front doors, my mom was standing there. She was barefoot despite it being the middle of January with frost on the ground. Her clothes were disheveled, just sweatpants and a thin t-shirt, no coat. Her hair was soaking wet and dripping down her face. But it wasn't raining, and her skin was covered in sweat despite the freezing temperature. What I remember most was her eyes, wide open, fixed directly on me across the chapel. She didn't look at anyone else, didn't respond when Pastor Mike spoke to her. She just stared at me with this smile that wasn't really a smile. Her lips were curved upward, but there was nothing warm or maternal about it. Without saying a word, she held out her hand toward me. The entire chapel had gone silent. I remember looking around, waiting for someone to do something, to acknowledge how bizarre this was, but everyone just watched in uncomfortable silence. I gathered my things and went to her. What else could I do? She was my mother, and clearly something was wrong. As we left, she still didn't speak, just gripped my hand painfully tight and led me to our car. She drove us home in complete silence, that same unnerving smile fixed on her face. I was too scared to ask questions. The next morning, she woke me up for breakfast, cheerful and normal. "Better hurry up and eat before your pancakes get cold," she said. "What time does the lock-in end today? Do you need me to pick you up?" I stared at her, confused. "Mom, you already picked me up last night. Remember?" She laughed like I'd told a joke. "What are you talking about? You're still at the lock-in. I'm making you breakfast for when you get home later." The shock must have shown on my face because her expression changed to concern. She put her hand on my forehead. "Are you feeling okay? Did you have a nightmare?" I tried to explain what had happened. Her showing up in the middle of the night, the knocking, her wet hair and bare feet in freezing weather, the silent car ride. She had no memory of any of it. She became increasingly upset as I insisted it was real, eventually snapping that I needed to stop making things up for attention. What disturbed me most was that nobody at church ever mentioned the incident again. Not Pastor Mike, not the youth leader, not any of the other kids who'd been there. It was like everyone had silently agreed to pretend it never happened. I tried asking my friend Bethany about it a few days later, but she just looked uncomfortable and changed the subject. When I pressed her, she finally said, "Look, my mom told me not to talk about whatever happened that night. She said it's a private family matter." After that, things settled down for a while. Mom had her usual ups and downs, but nothing as extreme as these episodes. When I left for college, part of me was relieved to be away from the unpredictability of living with her. Mom passed away 3 years ago from an accidental overdose. Going through her things afterward, I found journals where she documented periods of lost time, hours and sometimes entire days she couldn't account for. In one entry, she wrote, "Something else is here with me, using me. I can feel it watching from behind my eyes." I know the rational explanation is that she was suffering from severe mental illness combined with substance abuse. The dream that came true was just coincidence. The snake incident happened during a manic episode. The church lock-in was another psychotic break. But part of me still wonders if something more was happening in Pinecrest. Something that found its way into my mother during her most vulnerable moments. Something that knew how to wear her face but couldn't quite get the details right. I still haven't been back to Pinecrest since her funeral. I'm not sure I ever will. Story 11. I've been a delivery driver for almost 2 years now, and most nights are pretty routine. Pick up food, drop it off, collect tips, repeat. But what happened 3 nights ago has me seriously reconsidering this job. I haven't slept properly since, and I keep checking my locks and looking over my shoulder. I need to get this off my chest because it's eating me alive. So I work in Marichal, mostly covering the downtown and residential areas. The app I work for lets us see the delivery fee and tip up front, which helps decide which orders to take. That night around 11:30, an order popped up with a $25 tip already included, which never happens in my area. The drop-off was in the industrial district on the outskirts of town, which I usually avoid, especially late at night. It's mostly abandoned factories and warehouses, from when the textile industry collapsed here about 15 years ago. But man, $25 is $25, right? I figured it was probably just some security guard working night shift or maybe a cleaning crew that got hungry. The pickup was from this burger place that stays open late, and the order was pretty substantial, enough food for at least 3 or 4 people. I grabbed the order and plugged the address into my GPS. As I started driving out there, the streets got emptier, the streetlights fewer, and this uneasy feeling started building in my stomach. You know when your instincts are screaming at you, but you ignore them? Yeah, that's what I was doing. The industrial park is this maze of crumbling buildings covered in graffiti. Most of the windows are smashed out, and they look like these huge dead things with empty eye sockets staring at you. There's trash everywhere, old equipment rusting away, and barely any working lights. I had to use my high beams just to see where I was going. The GPS took me deeper and deeper into this labyrinth of abandoned buildings. I kept thinking I should just turn around, but then I'd remind myself about that $25 tip. My car was the only sound for miles, just the engine and the crunch of broken glass and debris under my tires. Finally, the GPS said I'd arrived. It was this massive warehouse with chrome siding that gleamed even in the darkness. It looked newer than the other buildings, but there wasn't a single light on inside. No cars parked outside. Nothing to suggest anyone was actually there waiting for food. I sat in my car for a minute, engine still running, trying to make sense of it. The address matched what was in the app. I checked the delivery notes. Nothing helpful, just leave at door. What door? The place looked like it had been closed for years. I decided to call the customer. The phone rang and rang, but nobody answered. That's when this ice-cold feeling washed over me. I started scanning the area more carefully, and that's when I saw them. Dark figures standing near the side of the building. At least 3 people, maybe more, half hidden in the shadows, just watching me. I immediately locked my doors, and my heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. One of the figures stepped forward slightly, and even though I couldn't see their face clearly, I knew they were staring right at me. I tried calling the customer again with shaking hands, but still no answer. That's when I decided to cancel the order and get the hell out of there. I'd rather lose $25 than whatever these people had planned. I put the car in reverse and was about to pull away when I heard an engine revving, loud and aggressive. A dirt bike with no lights came speeding around the corner of the warehouse. The rider was wearing all black with a helmet that had this dark visor completely hiding their face. They skidded to a stop directly behind my car, blocking my exit route. My mouth went completely dry. I looked forward again and saw the 3 figures I'd spotted earlier now walking toward my car. They were all wearing these generic Halloween-type masks that covered their whole faces. One had a baseball bat. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight they hurt. I could feel sweat running down my back despite the cold night. They were surrounding my car, the bike behind me, the 3 masked men approaching from the front. I realized I had only one option. I threw the car into reverse, turned the wheel hard, and floored it. The bike rider tried to move to block me again, but I managed to scrape past him. There was this horrible sound of metal on metal as my car scraped against the dirt bike. The rider shouted something and tried to grab my side mirror. I didn't stop. I kept reversing until I could turn around, then slammed it into drive and sped away. In my rearview mirror, I could see the bike rider getting back on and the figures running toward vehicles parked on the other side of the warehouse that I hadn't noticed before. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely steer. I made it to the main road and slowed down just enough to call emergency services. My voice was trembling as I tried to explain what happened. The dispatcher kept telling me to calm down, which only made me more frantic. She told me to drive straight to the nearest police station, which was about 15 minutes away. The entire drive there, I kept checking my mirrors, convinced they were following me. Every car behind me made my heart rate spike. I ran 2 red lights because I was too scared to stop. When I finally reached the police station, I practically fell out of my car. I was hyperventilating so badly, one of the officers thought I was having a heart attack. They brought me inside, gave me water, and had me sit down to give my statement. I showed them the delivery app with the order information, described the warehouse and the people I saw. When an officer went outside to check my car, he pointed out the deep scratch along the passenger side where I'd scraped against the dirt bike. There was even black paint transferred onto my white car. They took everything seriously, which I was grateful for. One officer told me they'd had reports of a car theft ring operating in that area. They'd lure delivery drivers or rideshare services out there, then steal their cars at gunpoint or knife point. Sometimes they'd beat the drivers too. He said I was lucky I managed to get away. I gave them the exact address from the app, and they said they'd send officers to investigate. They also took my contact information and the details from the app about the customer who placed the order. I didn't feel safe going home alone, so I called my roommate to come pick me up. I left my car at the police station overnight. When she arrived, I broke down completely. I couldn't stop shaking. She had to drive me to her parents' house because I was too scared to go back to our apartment. 2 days later, an officer called me. They'd gone to the warehouse and found evidence that people had been using it recently. Cigarette butts, empty beer cans, and oil stains from vehicles. But whoever was there that night was long gone. They also told me they'd tried tracing the phone number and payment method from the app, but both were linked to stolen identities. I picked up my car yesterday, but I haven't been able to make myself do any more deliveries. I keep seeing those masked figures walking toward me every time I close my eyes. I keep hearing that dirt bike engine. The scratch on my car is a constant reminder of how close I came to. I don't even want to think about what might have happened. The $25 tip that seemed so appealing now feels like the stupidest reason to risk my life. I've learned that no amount of money is worth putting yourself in danger like that. I'll probably look for another job soon, something that doesn't involve driving to strange addresses at night. I've reported everything to the delivery app company too, but they just sent a generic response about taking customer safety seriously. I doubt anything will change. The police said they'll keep me updated if they find anything, but I'm not holding my breath. Those people are probably already setting up their next trap for some other desperate driver chasing a big tip. I just keep thinking about how easily I dismissed my initial feelings that something was wrong. How I convinced myself it was worth the risk for a few extra dollars. How close I came to becoming just another statistic, another news story about a driver who disappeared. If you're a delivery driver reading this, please trust your instincts. No tip is worth your life. If something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. I got lucky. The next person might not. Story 12. I still get chills thinking about what happened last summer. I've been camping my whole life, usually planned trips with friends, but this time was different. Work had been insane for weeks, and I just needed to get away. No cell phones, no emails, just me and Buck, my 4-year-old German Shepherd mix. It was a Friday afternoon in late July when I made the spontaneous decision. I threw my basic camping gear in the trunk, filled a cooler with some beer and sandwich stuff, and Buck jumped in the back seat like he always does when he sees the camping gear come out. I had no destination in mind, just headed toward the state forest about an hour from my house. I found this unmarked gravel road I'd never been down before. It looked promising, not too overgrown, but definitely not heavily traveled. I drove in about 3 kilometers, pulled off to a small clearing, and decided this would be home for the night. Nothing fancy. The weather forecast was clear, so I just packed light, my small 2-person tent, sleeping bag, some food, and basic supplies. Buck and I hiked about 400 meters into the woods, found a nice spot between 2 tall oaks where I could string up a tarp as a quick shelter. I wasn't trying to go deep into the wilderness or anything, just far enough to feel away from everything. You know that sweet spot where you can't hear traffic anymore, but you're not so far in that you need serious survival gear? The afternoon was perfect. Buck chased squirrels while I set up camp. I gathered wood, built a small fire pit with some rocks, and strung my tarp between the trees. Nothing Instagram-worthy, just functional. I had cell service but purposely kept my phone off. That was the whole point. Disconnect for a night. As the sun started to set, I got a small fire going. Nothing big, just enough to cook my dinner. Just some instant noodles with canned chicken mixed in, camping gourmet, right? And provide some light. Buck had settled down beside me after eating his kibble, and I was nursing my second beer, feeling that perfect calm that only comes when you're away from all the noise of everyday life. It was nearly dark, that weird twilight time in the woods when everything gets really quiet for a while, when I first heard the vehicle. At first, I didn't think much of it. The sound was distant, probably someone driving on the same gravel road I'd come in on. But as I listened, I realized the engine noise was coming from the opposite direction, behind my campsite. That's when I remembered seeing what looked like another road on my hiking app earlier. I hadn't paid much attention to it because it didn't affect my hiking plans. Now I realized I'd set up camp in a sort of peninsula between 2 roads, the one I'd driven in on, and another that apparently looped around behind where I was camping. Based on the engine noise, this second road was maybe only 200 meters from my camp, just through the trees. The truck, and I could tell it was a truck from the rumbling engine, was driving fast. Too fast for a gravel road in the dark. I heard it skid to a stop somewhere behind my camp. Buck's head popped up immediately, his ears forward. He wasn't growling yet, but I could feel him tense up beside me. Then came the voices. Several male voices, loud and boisterous. You know that distinctive sound of drunk guys trying to be funny? That excessive volume, the exaggerated laughs? Yeah, that. I couldn't make out specific words, but the tone was unmistakable. They were hammered. I wasn't too concerned yet. Just some guys having a few beers in the woods on a Friday night. No big deal. Live and let live, right? Buck had different ideas. He was on his feet now, staring into the darkness behind our camp, his tail stiff. "It's okay, buddy," I whispered, putting my hand on his back. "They're just having fun." Then came the first gunshot. It was loud, much louder than I expected. The sharp crack echoed through the trees, and I nearly dropped my beer. Buck went rigid, and I grabbed his collar instinctively. "Jesus," I muttered. A pause followed, maybe 3 or 4 seconds of silence, then another shot, and another. 3 rapid-fire shots that sounded like a handgun. More laughter, more shouting. Someone yelled something that sounded like, "You missed by a mile." Then came a different sound, the deeper boom of what had to be a shotgun. My heart was pounding now. Buck was trembling under my hand, torn between fear and his protective instincts. I was trying to process what was happening. These drunk idiots were shooting guns in the dark, in my direction, with absolutely no idea I was there. I tried to visualize the terrain. Based on the sound and what I remembered from hiking in, there was a slight rise behind my camp, then it sloped down toward what must be that second road. If they were shooting from the road, firing uphill. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. They could easily be shooting directly at or over the ridge where my campsite was. I was potentially in their line of fire. Another volley of shots rang out. Different guns now. It sounded like at least 3 different weapons. These guys were having a regular shooting party. More laughter. Someone cranked up music from the truck, heavy bass thumping through the trees. I knew I needed to get out of there, fast. I whispered to Buck to stay close and began gathering my essential stuff: phone, car keys, wallet. I left the tarp up but kicked dirt over my small fire until it was completely out. Every few seconds, more shots would ring out, followed by whoops and hollers. I could hear glass breaking too. They were probably shooting at bottles. My hands were shaking as I stuffed my sleeping bag into its compression sack. Not everything was going to fit in my backpack, but I didn't care. I could come back for the rest in daylight if necessary. The important thing was getting out safely. Buck stayed glued to my side, which was unusual for him. He normally loves to patrol our campsite perimeter, but he sensed the danger. I clipped his leash on and kept it short. The last thing I needed was for him to bolt toward the noise and either get shot or alert these drunk idiots to our presence. Another shot. This one sounded like a rifle, with a much sharper crack that echoed longer. It was followed by the pinging sound of a bullet hitting something metallic. They must have set up cans or something to shoot at. I slung my half-packed bag over my shoulder, grabbed my flashlight but kept it off, and started moving away from the campsite, heading back toward my car. I was hunched low, moving as quietly as possible while still trying to move quickly. Buck seemed to understand the need for stealth. He moved silently beside me, ears still alert. The terrain was trickier to navigate in the dark. What had been an easy hike in was now an obstacle course of roots, fallen branches, and uneven ground. I stumbled twice but managed to keep my footing. All the while, my back crawled with the feeling of exposure. Every shot made me flinch and duck lower, even though the rational part of my brain knew they couldn't see me. But that was the thing. Rationality doesn't count for much when you're dealing with drunk people firing guns in random directions in the dark. One stray bullet, one poorly aimed shot, and I could end up dead in the woods with no one knowing where I was. We were maybe halfway back to the car when the shooting intensified. It sounded like they were taking turns with different weapons. Handguns, shotguns, rifles, all firing in what seemed like a chaotic free-for-all. The music from their truck got louder too, like they'd cranked it up to enhance their impromptu shooting range. I picked up my pace, no longer as concerned with noise. The gunfire and music would mask any sounds I made anyway. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Buck was panting beside me, feeding off my anxiety. Then I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. The truck's engine started up again, and it sounded like it was moving. Were they leaving? Or worse, were they driving around, still shooting? I froze for a moment, trying to determine which direction they were heading. The engine revved loudly. Then I heard the distinctive sound of tires spinning in gravel. They were doing donuts or some kind of reckless driving, and they were still shooting. I could hear gunfire over the engine noise. I started moving again, faster now. My car was only about 200 meters away, but it felt like 2 kilometers. Every step, I expected to hear a bullet whiz past or feel the impact of a shot. My imagination was in overdrive. I kept thinking about those news stories where people get hit by celebratory gunfire or stray bullets from miles away. These guys were much closer than that. When I finally saw my car through the trees, it looked like salvation. I've never been so happy to see my beat-up old Subaru. I fumbled with my keys, hands shaking so badly I could barely hit the unlock button. Buck jumped in the back the second I opened the door, and I threw my pack in after him. I got in and closed the door as quietly as possible. Should I risk turning on the headlights? The shooters were behind me in the opposite direction, but would they notice car lights through the trees? I made a split-second decision. I started the car but left the headlights off. I knew the first part of the gravel road pretty well, and there was just enough moonlight to see the basic outline. I'd drive without lights until I hit the main road. I put the car in gear and started rolling forward slowly. In my rearview mirror, I could still hear the gunshots, still hear their truck engine revving. Buck was pacing anxiously in the back seat, whining softly. "It's okay, buddy," I whispered. "We're getting out of here." I crept along that gravel road for what felt like forever, straining to see in the dark, terrified of running off the road or hitting a fallen tree. After about a kilometer, when I was sure I was far enough away, I finally turned on my headlights and picked up speed. When I reached the paved road, I felt like I could breathe again. I pulled over and just sat there for a minute shaking. Buck came up from the back seat and pushed his head between the front seats, licking my face. I hugged him, probably a bit too tightly, but he didn't seem to mind. It's been months since that night, and I still get jumpy when I hear loud noises while camping. I reported the incident to the Forest Service and local sheriff the next day. They said they'd look into it, but I never heard anything back. I didn't go back for the rest of my gear. Some things aren't worth the risk. I still go camping, but now I always check maps carefully for nearby roads, and I go much deeper into wilderness areas. And I always tell someone exactly where I'll be. Those guys probably have no idea how close they came to tragedy that night. They were just out having what they thought was harmless fun. But sitting here now, I can't stop thinking about how differently things could have gone if Buck and I had been just a little bit closer to their shooting range, or if one of them had decided to hike up that ridge to see what was on the other side. Sometimes I still wake up at night, hearing those gunshots in my dreams, feeling that crawling sensation on my back like I'm in someone's crosshairs. I don't think I'll ever shake that feeling completely. Story 13. I've debated whether to share this for months. Even typing this makes my hands shake, but I need to get it out. I need to know if anyone else has seen what I've seen. Back in June, I overdosed. I won't go into why. That's not the point of this post. What matters is what happened during those 40 minutes when, according to the hospital records, I was clinically dead. I remember the paramedics arriving at my apartment. I remember the ceiling lights of the ambulance flickering above me. Then nothing, until I woke up somewhere else. The first thing I noticed was the smell, like burned plastic and rotting meat mixed together. I was lying on what felt like rough stone, hot enough to scorch my skin. When I opened my eyes, everything was bathed in a dull red light. The sky, if you could call it that, was the color of dried blood. I stood up, my legs shaking. The landscape around me was just wrong. It looked like a desert with jagged rocks jutting out at impossible angles. In the distance, I could see what looked like mountains, but they kept shifting, like they couldn't decide on their shape. I started walking because what else could I do? The ground felt hot through my shoes. the same shoes I'd been wearing when I collapsed in my apartment. I was still in my jeans and t-shirt, but they were filthy, covered in a gritty black substance that smelled like sulfur. After walking for what felt like minutes, there was no way to tell time. Everything changed. Not gradually, instantly. 1 second I was in that burning desert, and the next I was standing on a vast plain of ice. The transition was so sudden that my brain couldn't process it. The heat that had been scorching my skin was replaced by a cold so intense it felt like my blood was freezing. But it wasn't just my body that froze. My thoughts became sluggish. I couldn't remember my name. I couldn't remember why I was there or where there even was. The cold seeped into my mind, crystallizing my memories, making them brittle and sharp. I tried to scream, but my throat was too frozen to make a sound. Then, just as suddenly, I was back in the heat. But this wasn't the dry heat of the desert. This was humid, suffocating. I was in a jungle of twisted black trees with leaves that looked like hands. The air was thick with steam that burned my lungs with each breath. And with the heat came rage, uncontrollable, all-consuming rage that wasn't mine. It filled me up like a poison, making me want to tear my own skin off. I punched one of the trees until my knuckles bled, and I swear it laughed at me. That's when I realized the worst part about this place. It wasn't just changing around me, it was changing me. The ice had frozen my thoughts. The heat had filled me with rage. Whatever this place was, it didn't just want to hurt my body. It wanted to strip away whatever made me me. I started running, desperate to find something familiar, something stable, but directions made no sense. I'd run forward only to find myself back where I started. I'd turn right 3 times and end up in the same spot. The landscape kept shifting, desert to ice to jungle to something else that had no name, a place where the ground was made of what looked like pulsing flesh. I don't know how long I wandered through these constantly changing hells. Time didn't exist there, but eventually I came to the pit. It was massive, wider than I could see across. The edge where I stood was crumbling, bits of rock breaking away and falling into the darkness below. But it wasn't just darkness. As my eyes adjusted, I could see movement in there. Faces, thousands of faces, all melded together into the walls of the pit. They were screaming and laughing at the same time, their eyes rolling wildly, their features constantly shifting and rearranging. I had to walk along the edge. There was no other way to go. The path behind me had disappeared, replaced by a wall of what looked like glass, but reflected nothing. Each step I took, the edge crumbled a little more beneath my feet. I could feel the pit watching me, hungry for me to fall. That's when I saw them climbing up from below. They looked human-shaped from a distance, but as they got closer, I could see they were anything but. Their bodies were charred black, limbs bent at angles that shouldn't be possible. Some had too many arms, others had none at all. Their skin was cracked like old leather, with something glowing red pulsing underneath. But their faces, God, their faces. Their mouths stretched impossibly wide, taking up most of their heads. And inside those mouths were teeth. Not normal teeth, but row after row of them, constantly shifting and multiplying like maggots. Some had eyes scattered across their bodies, all blinking at different times. They climbed with a terrible purpose, their movements jerky but deliberate. They weren't mindless monsters. There was intelligence in the way they positioned themselves, cutting off possible escape routes. They were hunting me. One got close enough that I could smell it, like burned hair and rotten eggs. It reached for my ankle with a hand that had too many joints. I kicked at it and ran along the edge, panic giving me speed I didn't know I had. The edge got narrower. On my left was the wall of not glass. On my right, the pit with those things still climbing toward me. Ahead, the path disappeared entirely. I was trapped. The nearest creature pulled itself onto the ledge. It stood up, or tried to. Its body didn't work right, like it was constantly breaking and healing in all the wrong ways. It made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite a scream, and took a step toward me. I backed up until my heel was hanging over the edge of the pit. More creatures were climbing up behind the first. They were taking their time now, knowing I had nowhere to go. The first one lunged at me, its mouth stretching open wide enough to swallow my head. I fell backward, certain I was about to tumble into the pit, but I didn't fall into the pit. I woke up in the hospital with a tube down my throat and machines beeping all around me. The doctors said I'd been dead for nearly 40 minutes before they managed to bring me back. They called it a miracle. I didn't tell them where I'd been. How could I? They'd think I was crazy or that my brain had been damaged by lack of oxygen. Maybe that's true. Maybe all of this was just some hallucination my dying brain cooked up. But it felt real. More real than this hospital room. More real than the life I came back to. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still see that pit. I can feel those creatures watching me, waiting. The doctors discharged me after a week. I've been trying to get back to normal, but nothing feels right anymore. I can't stand being in small rooms. They remind me of how the landscape would suddenly close in around me. I panic when it gets too hot or too cold. My mind immediately goes back to how those temperature extremes affected not just my body, but my mind. Last night I woke up at 3 a.m, certain I could hear that not quite laughing, not quite screaming sound coming from inside my closet. I didn't open it. I couldn't. I sat on my bed until dawn, watching the closet door, terrified it would open on its own. I don't know how I escaped from that place. 1 second I was about to be torn apart by those creatures, and the next I was back in my body, gasping for air as doctors shocked my heart back to life. It was too sudden, too easy. It makes me wonder if I really did escape, or if this is just another trick, another shifting landscape designed to give me hope before tearing it away. Sometimes I catch glimpses of things that shouldn't be there. A shadow with too many limbs, a face in the crowd with a mouth that stretches too wide. I tell myself it's just my imagination, trauma from a near-death experience. But what if it's not? What if something followed me back? I haven't told anyone else about this, not my family, not my therapist. You're the first to hear my story. I need to know if anyone else has seen what I've seen, if anyone else has been to that place of shifting chaos and somehow made it back. Because if I'm the only one, then maybe I really am just crazy. But if I'm not alone, if others have seen that pit and those creatures, then what does that mean? What is waiting for us all when we die? I don't have answers. All I know is that I'm afraid to close my eyes at night, afraid that when I open them again, I'll be back there, standing at the edge of that pit, with those things climbing up to claim me. And this time, there might be no way back. Story 14. I'm still nervous typing this out, but I need to get it off my chest. This happened about 8 months ago when I was working at Café do Paulo, this small diner in Curitiba, where I've been for about 6 months. Nothing fancy, just your typical place with cheap coffee and decent sandwiches that college students like me can afford on both ends. The job was perfect for my situation. I'm studying engineering at the Federal University, and Paulo, the owner, was super flexible with my class schedule. The pay wasn't amazing, but it kept gas in my old Honda Civic and helped with textbooks. Most nights were completely routine: take orders, bring food, clean tables, repeat until closing time. Nothing exciting. That Wednesday night started like any other. We had the usual dinner rush around 7 in the evening, mostly regulars, a few tourists, and some college kids. I was handling the front section alone since we were short-staffed. Around 9:30, things finally slowed down, and I was wiping down the counter when I felt, I don't know how to explain it exactly, like when someone's watching you, that weird prickly feeling on the back of your neck. I looked up and immediately noticed this guy sitting alone in the corner booth. Mid-40s maybe, average build, wearing this red and black football cap for Atlético Paranaense, our local team. Nothing particularly remarkable about him, except he was staring directly at me with this slight smile. I figured maybe he needed his check or wanted to order something else, so I gave a quick nod and went back to wiping tables. A couple minutes later, I felt it again. Looked up, and there he was, still watching me. This time, he didn't look away when our eyes met. His smile just got a little wider. It was weird, but I've dealt with odd customers before. Maybe he was drunk or something. When I finally went to his table to check if he needed anything, he immediately leaned forward. "You're very attentive," he said in Portuguese with an accent I couldn't place. "How long have you been working here?" I gave my standard customer service response, something vague like, "A while now." But he kept pushing. "You're in school, yes? What are you studying?" Then before I could answer, "What time do you usually finish work? Do you work tomorrow too?" Each question made my stomach tighten a little more. I've had customers try to make conversation before, but something about his tone felt off. I mumbled something about being busy and tried to move away, but he reached out and almost touched my arm. I stepped back just in time. "I'm enjoying the view from this table," he said, his eyes never leaving my face. "Maybe I'll come back tomorrow, same time?" I nodded automatically, customer service instinct, then immediately regretted it. I retreated to the kitchen and told Paulo about the creepy guy. Paulo glanced out and just shrugged. "If he's paying and not causing trouble, what can we do?" For the next hour, I avoided that section as much as possible. Every time I had to walk past, the man would track me with his eyes. Sometimes he'd raise his coffee cup in a little toast. He finally paid and left around 10:45, 15 minutes before closing. I actually watched through the window to make sure he drove away. By 11:30, I was exhausted and just wanted to get home. After locking up with Paulo, I walked across the poorly lit parking lot to my car, checking over my shoulder every few steps. My car was the only one left besides Paulo's, and I felt stupid for being so paranoid. The guy was gone. Just another weirdo customer, right? The drive home should have taken about 20 minutes, straight down Avenida República Argentina, then through a few residential streets to my apartment. About 10 minutes in, I was finally starting to relax when I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. Nothing unusual about that, obviously, but something made me pay attention. The car was maintaining the exact same distance behind me, not getting closer or falling back. When I slowed down a bit, they slowed down too. I told myself I was being paranoid after the weird encounter at the diner, but then I made a right turn onto a side street I normally wouldn't take, and those headlights followed. I made another random turn. The car turned too. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I made a third unnecessary turn into a quiet residential neighborhood. The car stayed with me, keeping that same careful distance. By now, my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I tried to get a better look at the car in my mirrors, but all I could see were the headlights. They were kept on high beam, making it impossible to see the driver or even the make of the car. I started running through my options. I could try to lose them, but my old Honda wasn't exactly built for speed. I could drive to a friend's place, but what if that just showed the stalker where my friends lived? I could go home, but then they'd know exactly where I lived. With one hand still on the wheel, I fumbled for my phone and dialed 911. My voice was shaking as I tried to explain the situation to the dispatcher. "You're being followed?" The woman on the line sounded calm, which helped steady me a little. "Yes, for at least 10 minutes now. They're following every turn I make." "Can you see who it is, or what kind of vehicle?" "No, they're keeping their high beams on. I can't see anything." "Okay, listen carefully. Don't drive home. Head directly to the nearest police station. Do you know where that is?" I did. There was a station about 5 minutes away if I turned around. The dispatcher stayed on the line as I made a sharp U-turn at the next intersection. The following car did the same. "They're still behind me," I told her, my voice cracking a little. "That's okay. Just keep driving normally toward the station. Don't speed or drive erratically." Easy for her to say. My foot wanted to floor the accelerator, but I followed her instructions, driving at the speed limit while constantly checking my mirrors. The car behind me suddenly sped up, closing some of the distance between us. "They're getting closer," I whispered into the phone. "How far are you from the station?" 3 minutes, maybe." "Good. Officers are being notified. Just keep driving." Those 3 minutes felt like 3 hours. The headlights behind me grew larger in my mirrors as the car continued to close the gap. I could now make out that it was a dark sedan, but still couldn't see the driver. As I approached the police station, I saw the illuminated sign and nearly cried with relief. Just as I was about to turn into the parking lot, the car behind me suddenly accelerated, pulling alongside me for just a second. I couldn't help it. I turned to look. All I could see was a silhouette and the red and black football cap, the same man from the diner. Then he sped away, tires squealing as he disappeared down a side street. I pulled into the police station parking lot and just sat there, hands still, gripping the wheel, trying to breathe normally again. The police took my statement, but without a license plate or clear description of the vehicle, there wasn't much they could do. They sent a patrol car to follow me home and suggested I vary my routes to and from work, park in well-lit areas, and report any further incidents immediately. I couldn't sleep that night or the next. I kept replaying everything in my mind, wondering if there were signs I missed. Why did he choose me? Was it random, or had he been watching me before? I didn't go to work for a week. When I finally returned, Paulo had installed better lights in the parking lot and gave me shifts that ended before dark. I started carpooling with another waiter who lived near my neighborhood. I changed my routes constantly, checking my mirrors obsessively at every intersection. It's been 8 months, and I haven't seen the man or that car again. But I still can't shake the feeling of being watched. I park as close to entrances as possible. I avoid side streets completely. I've mapped out the location of every police station in my regular driving areas. The worst part isn't even the fear of seeing him again. It's how completely this one night changed me. I used to drive with the windows down, music playing, not thinking twice about being alone. Now I lock my doors immediately, keep the windows up, and can't stop checking my mirrors every few seconds. I don't know if he was just trying to scare me or if he had worse intentions. I don't know if he's still out there, watching and waiting for me to let my guard down. But I do know that feeling of being hunted through familiar streets isn't something you ever really get over. Every time headlights stay behind me for too long, I feel that same panic rising in my chest. That night at the diner taught me how quickly safety can become fear and how one person can take away your sense of security in an instant. I'm trying to move forward, but part of me is always looking back, wondering if those headlights in my mirror are just an ordinary car or something worse. Story 15. I've been a delivery driver for almost 6 years now. You learn a lot in this job. The shortcuts around town, which apartment complexes are a maze, and which customers tip well. But last Friday, I learned something I wish I hadn't. How quickly a routine delivery can turn into something terrifying. I work mainly evenings, and Friday nights are usually busy. This particular Friday was no different. I'd been on the road since 4 in the afternoon, music playing low on my car stereo, just going through the motions. My phone pinged around 10:30 with what I figured would be my last delivery of the night. 2 burritos and a cup of tea to an apartment complex on the outskirts of Itapira. Nothing unusual about the order itself. The delivery instructions were simple. Leave at door of Building 4, Unit 117. I'd been to this complex before, but not often enough to know my way around without checking the map. It's one of those sprawling places with multiple buildings that all look identical. Beige stucco, dark brown trim, numbered signs that are practically invisible at night. I pulled into the complex around 10:45. The entrance was dimly lit, and half the outdoor lights seemed to be burned out. Great. I hate delivering to places like this at night. I circled around twice, squinting at building numbers, getting increasingly frustrated. Finally found Building 4 near the front entrance, partially hidden behind an overgrown hedge. No wonder I missed it the first time. I parked in the visitor spot closest to the building, grabbed the food bag from my passenger seat, and double-checked the apartment number on my phone. Unit 117. I locked my car, always lock your car, no matter how quick the drop-off, and started walking toward the building. It was quiet. Too quiet, really. Most apartment complexes have some life to them, even late on a Friday. You'd hear TVs through windows, people talking on balconies, maybe some music, but this place felt abandoned. The only sounds were my footsteps on the concrete and some distant traffic from the main road. Out of habit, I scanned the parking lot while walking. Not many cars around, a couple of older sedans, a pickup truck, and one black sedan parked at the far end of the lot. Nothing unusual, just normal cars in a normal parking lot. But something made me look twice at that black sedan. Maybe because it was parked so far from any of the buildings. I didn't think much of it then. I found Unit 117 on the ground floor, left the food by the door, took a quick photo as proof of delivery, and sent the confirmation through the app. As I was putting my phone back in my pocket, I got this weird feeling, like I was being watched. You know that prickle on the back of your neck? That. I turned to head back to my car, walking a bit faster than before. That's when I noticed the black sedan was no longer at the far end of the lot. It was now parked just a few spaces from my own car. I'm absolutely certain it wasn't there when I parked. My heart started beating faster, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the owner came home while I was delivering, and it just happened to be a similar car. I kept walking, keys already in hand, trying not to look like I was rushing. When I was about 20 feet from my car, I saw movement inside the sedan. The interior light flicked on for just a second as a door opened, then off again. Before I could process what was happening, 2 men got out of the sedan. One headed directly toward my driver's side, while the other circled around to the passenger side of my car. They moved with purpose, like they'd done this before. The first guy was wearing a dark hoodie despite the warm night, and the second had on a baseball cap pulled low over his face. I froze for a second, not sure what to do. Run back to the apartment building? Try to get to my car before they did? My instincts kicked in, and I decided to just act normal and get to my car. Maybe they weren't after me. Maybe this was all in my head. I reached my car and quickly unlocked it with the key fob. Just as I opened the driver's door and slid inside, the first man reached me. He knocked on my window, not aggressively but firmly. I hesitated, then lowered it about an inch. "Hey, roll your window down," he said. His voice was calm, almost professional. "We're neighborhood security. Need to know what you're doing here." That's when alarm bells really started ringing in my head. First, he wasn't wearing any kind of uniform or badge. Second, what kind of security approaches people from separate directions and corners them at their car? Third, I'd delivered to this complex before and never seen or heard about any security patrol. "I'm just delivering food," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I held up my phone with the delivery app still open. "Just dropped off at Unit 117. You can check if you want." The man barely glanced at my phone. The second guy, meanwhile, had reached my passenger door and was trying the handle. Thank God I'd locked it automatically when I got in, a habit that might have saved my life. "We've had some problems around here," the first man said, moving slightly closer to my window. "What's your name? Who do you work for?" My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. My hands were shaking as I put the key in the ignition. The second man was now standing very still by my passenger door, just watching. I noticed he had something in his hand, but couldn't tell what it was. "Look, I'm just a delivery driver," I said. "I don't want any trouble. I delivered the food and I'm leaving now." The first man's expression changed. His professional demeanor dropped, and he put his hand on my door handle, trying to open it. "Step out of the car for a minute. We just need to talk." That's when I knew for absolute certain this wasn't security, and they weren't just checking on suspicious activity. This was something else entirely. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. Should I start the car and drive off? What if they had a weapon? What if they followed me? And then, like something out of a movie but completely real, the apartment building door burst open. A huge, shirtless guy, must have been at least 6'4" and built like a linebacker, came storming out, shouting at the top of his lungs. "Hey, what the fuck are you doing? Get away from him!" The two men turned toward the noise. The shirtless guy was coming right at us, moving fast. "He's just delivering food I ordered," he shouted. "He's good, let him go." The first man backed away from my window. The second guy started moving back toward their sedan. They didn't run exactly, but they moved with purpose. The shirtless guy reached my car just as the two men were getting back into the black sedan. He stood protectively between their car and mine. "You guys need to get the fuck out of here," the shirtless guy said, his voice lower now but still intense. "I've seen you around here too much lately." Without saying a word, the two men got into their sedan and drove off. No squealing tires, no dramatic exit. They just pulled out of the parking space and left, headlights off until they reached the complex exit. The shirtless guy, my unexpected savior, turned to me. Up close, I could see he had tattoos covering most of his chest and arms. His expression softened as he leaned down toward my window. "You okay, man?" he asked. I realized I was shaking. My hands could barely grip the steering wheel, and I was struggling to take a full breath. "Yeah," I managed to say. "Thanks. Who were those guys?" He shook his head. "Don't know exactly, but they've been hanging around for the past couple weeks. Not residents. Think they're looking for easy targets. Delivery drivers, people coming home late alone. You should report this." I nodded, still trying to process what had just happened. "You ordered the burritos?" I asked stupidly, like my brain couldn't move past the original reason I was there. He laughed, which broke some of the tension. "Yeah, that was me. Didn't expect dinner and a show." Then he got serious again. "Listen, you should go. Those guys might circle back. I'd call the police if I were you." I thanked him again, started my car with still trembling hands, and drove to a gas station about a mile away. I sat in the parking lot for nearly 30 minutes, trying to calm down enough to drive home. I kept looking in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see that black sedan pulling up behind me. The next morning, I reported the incident through the delivery app. I also shared what happened in our drivers' group chat, warning everyone to be careful at that complex, especially at night. Part of me felt bad for the innocent residents there who just want to order dinner without hassle, but I couldn't risk something like this happening again, to me or to another driver. It's been almost a week now, and I still get nervous when I have to make deliveries after dark. I've started carrying pepper spray, and I'm much more aware of my surroundings. I check my mirrors constantly, watching for cars that might be following me from one delivery to another. The thing that scares me most isn't what happened, it's what could have happened. If that customer hadn't come out when he did, I don't know what those men would have done. Were they planning to rob me, carjack me, something worse? I'll never know, and that's the thought that keeps me awake at night. So to all the delivery drivers out there, trust your instincts, lock your doors, and always be aware of your surroundings. And to the shirtless guy with the tattoos who ordered 2 burritos and a cup of tea, I owe you more than just your dinner. Story 16. I still get nervous writing this down, even though it's been 5 months since it all happened. My hands are shaking just thinking about it, but I need to get this out there. Maybe someone has experienced something similar or can help me make sense of what happened. I've been working at the rest stop bar for almost 2 years now. It's this little hole-in-the-wall place on the outskirts of town, right off the highway. Nothing fancy, just your typical small-town bar with wooden stools, dim lighting, and a jukebox that only works half the time. We mostly get regulars, local factory workers, truckers passing through, and sometimes people who get lost trying to find the interstate. The pay isn't great, but the tips are decent, and most of our customers are actually really nice. My boss, Mike, is a good guy who inherited the place from his dad. Until recently, I worked the weekday night shifts alone. Mike would come in around closing time to help cash out and lock up, but I was basically running the place on my own from 7 in the evening until 2 in the morning. I never really minded it. I know how to handle the occasional drunk idiot, and our regulars look out for me. This whole nightmare started on a Sunday night back in March. It was dead slow, just after 1 in the morning, and I was wiping down the bar, thinking about whether I should start college classes in the fall. The door opened, letting in a blast of cold air, and this man walked in. Right away, something felt different about him. He looked completely out of place. Most of our customers wear jeans and t-shirts or work clothes. This guy was wearing black dress pants, expensive-looking shoes, and a black turtleneck under this fancy trunk shirt. He looked like he should be at some upscale cocktail bar in the city, not our dingy little place. He was maybe in his 40s, clean-shaven, with this perfectly styled salt and pepper hair and a really expensive watch. When he sat down at the bar, I noticed his hands. They were almost too perfect. Manicured nails, not a callus in sight. No one who comes to our bar has hands like that. Everyone works with their hands around here. "What can I get you?" I asked, trying to be friendly but professional. He smiled, perfect white teeth, and scanned our liquor selection. "Do you have any Macallan?" he asked with a slight accent I couldn't place. Luckily, Mike had recently started stocking some higher-end stuff, so I grabbed the bottle of Macallan 18. His eyes lit up. "Neat, please," he said, watching me pour. As I slid his drink across the bar, he asked, "What's your name?" "Cadence," I replied. "We don't wear name tags, but I've never had an issue telling customers my first name." "Beautiful name," he said, taking a sip of his whiskey. "Do you enjoy working here, Cadence?" The question seemed innocent enough, but something in his tone made the hairs on my arms stand up. "It pays the bills," I answered with a shrug, moving away to wash some glasses. He nursed his drink slowly, asking casual questions about the area, how long I'd lived here, if there was much to do around town, that sort of thing. I gave vague answers while trying to keep busy with cleaning. Then, out of nowhere, he asked, "What time do you finish work tonight?" My stomach dropped. Rule number 1 of bartending as a woman: never tell customers when you're leaving. I mumbled something about having to close up and not being sure exactly when I'd be done. He nodded, not pressing further. After finishing his drink, he placed a $100 bill on the bar and stood up. The drink was only $15. When I reached for change, he stopped me. "Keep it," he said, giving me this weird smile that didn't reach his eyes. Then he turned and walked out without another word. I should have been happy about the tip, but instead, I felt sick to my stomach. I texted Mike asking him to come earlier than usual, and I kept checking the door until he arrived. I almost forgot about the guy until exactly a week later. Sunday night again, around the same time. This time, the man wasn't alone. He walked in with a woman who looked to be in her 30s. She was wearing this tight dress that seemed too young for her, lots of makeup, and jewelry that looked expensive but flashy. They sat at the bar, and the man ordered the same whiskey while the woman asked for a cosmopolitan. "Oh my God, you are so pretty," she said to me immediately, reaching across the bar and touching my arm. Her hand lingered there for too long. "Seriously, you could be a model." I mumbled a thanks and moved away to make her drink. When I returned, they were both staring at me in a way that made my skin crawl. "So how long have you worked here, sweetie?" the woman asked. I gave another vague answer, but she kept pushing. "Do you work every night, all by yourself?" She looked around the empty bar. "Isn't it scary being here alone?" The man stayed mostly quiet, just watching me with this intense stare while sipping his whiskey. But the woman wouldn't stop asking questions: where I lived, if I had a boyfriend, if I liked to party. "I run a sort of exclusive club," she eventually said, leaning in and lowering her voice like she was sharing a secret. "We're always looking for young, fun people to join our private parties. The pay is incredible. You could make a dead million for a weekend, no joke." "A dead million? Who talks like that?" I laughed nervously, saying I was happy with my job. But she kept pushing, saying I was perfect for their exclusive events. When I still didn't bite, she changed tactics. "Look, I understand you're hesitant, but we have someone outside who can explain better. Why don't you step out with me for just a minute and meet them?" My heart started racing. No way was I going outside with these people. Thankfully, right at that moment, the door opened and a group of 4 regulars, guys who work at the auto plant, walked in, laughing loudly. The couple exchanged a look, finished their drinks quickly, and left money on the bar. "Think about it," the woman said as they stood up. "We'll be in touch." The way she said it, "we'll be in touch," made it sound more like a threat than an offer. After they left, I was visibly shaken. One of the regulars, Dave, asked if I was okay, and I just said some customers had been weird. He and his friends stayed until closing, which made me feel safer. For the next couple of weeks, I was constantly looking over my shoulder. I asked Mike to switch my shifts, but we were short-staffed, so I still had to work some nights. I started carrying pepper spray and made sure my phone was always charged. Then it happened. I was driving home after my shift one Thursday night, around 2:30 in the morning. The roads were empty, as they usually are in our small town at that hour. About halfway home, I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. At first, I didn't think anything of it, but then I realized the car was matching my every turn. Even when I deliberately made a wrong turn, they followed. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I didn't drive straight home. No way was I leading them to my apartment. Instead, I drove toward the police station downtown. As soon as the station came into view, the car behind me sped up and passed me, disappearing down a side street. I couldn't see who was driving or get a good look at the vehicle, just that it was dark-colored and possibly a sedan. I filed a report, but the officer basically told me there wasn't much they could do. They said to call again if I noticed the car following me again. The next week, it was Sunday night again. We'd been busy earlier with a birthday party, but by 1 in the morning, the place was empty. I was counting down the minutes until Mike would arrive to help close. The door opened, and my blood ran cold when I saw the woman walk in, alone this time. "Just a cosmopolitan, sweetie," she said, sitting at the bar. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. My hands were shaking as I made her drink. I texted Mike under the bar, "Please come now, emergency." She watched me the entire time, making small talk that felt threatening despite her friendly tone. "Where's your friend tonight?" I asked, trying to sound casual while scanning the room. "Oh, he's around," she said vaguely. "He's very disappointed you haven't taken us up on our offer." I placed her drink in front of her and stepped back. "I'm not interested," I said firmly. She sipped her Cosmo slowly, watching me over the rim of her glass. "You know, not many people say no to us. We're very persuasive." I heard the front door open behind me but didn't turn around, assuming it was Mike. But the woman's eyes flicked toward the door, and she suddenly stood up, leaving her drink half-finished. "I need to use the ladies' room," she said, walking away from the bar. I glanced toward the front door, but no one was there. Confused, I looked toward the bathroom, but the woman wasn't heading there either. She had vanished. I ran to the front window and looked out into the parking lot. A black van was sliding up outside, its headlights off. The woman was walking quickly toward it. Then I heard it, a scraping sound from the back door that leads to the alley. Someone was trying to force it open. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. Just as the operator answered, I heard the sound of a car pulling into the parking lot, headlights flashing through the windows. The black van's engine revved, and it sped away. Mike rushed in, looking panicked. "What's going on? I got your text." I was sobbing so hard I could barely explain. When the police arrived, they reviewed our security footage. What we saw chilled me to the bone. While the woman was distracting me inside, two masked figures had positioned themselves by the front door. Another person was working on the back door. They had coordinated the whole thing to trap me inside. The police got a partial plate number from Mike's dash cam, but when they ran it, it wasn't registered in the system. They increased patrols around the bar for a few weeks, but eventually it all died down. The case is still open, but unsolved. Mike doesn't make me work alone at night anymore. He hired security for weekends, and I never close by myself, but I still feel incredibly unsafe during evening shifts. I've seen dark cars parked across the street sometimes, but they always drive away when someone walks toward them. The worst part is not knowing. Were they human traffickers? Part of some sick rich people's hunting game? Or something else entirely? And how did they know I would be working alone? Had they been watching me for weeks before approaching me? I'm saving up to move to another town, but until then, I'm constantly looking over my shoulder. I've changed my routine, my phone number, even my hair color, but I can't shake the feeling that they're still out there, watching and waiting for their chance. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, thinking I hear a car idling outside my window, and every time the door opens during my shift, I find myself holding my breath, afraid I'll see that man in the black turtleneck walking in again. Story 17. I've been working as a delivery driver for 3 years in Portela, a pretty quiet city in Brazil where nothing much happens. It's an okay job, decent tips, flexible hours, and I get to be on my own most of the time. I never thought I'd have to write something like this, but I need to get it off my chest and maybe warn others in the service industry. It started on a Tuesday evening about 2 months ago. Just a normal shift, nothing special. I had a delivery for an apartment building downtown, pasta, salad, and tiramisu from that fancy Italian place everyone likes. The customer's name on the order was Victor Mendez. I remember it clearly because, well, you'll understand why. When I got to his apartment, a guy in his early 30s opened the door. He looked completely normal, neat appearance, friendly smile, nothing that would raise any red flags. He paid with his card, gave me a decent tip, and then as I was turning to leave, he said something that caught me off guard. "You have a really nice voice, very distinctive." I didn't know how to respond to that. It wasn't the usual "thanks for the food" or "have a good night" that I typically get. I just awkwardly laughed it off, said thanks, and left. On the elevator ride down, I remember thinking it was a bit weird, but nothing worth worrying about. People say strange things sometimes, right? The next day, I was scrolling through this dating app I use occasionally when I got a new message. "Hey, you delivered my dinner last night, right? The pasta from Bella Italia? It's Victor." My stomach dropped. I hadn't mentioned where I worked on my profile. My picture on the app wasn't even clear, just me wearing sunglasses at the beach, taken from a distance. How the hell did he find me? I hadn't given him my full name or anything personal during that delivery. I didn't respond. I figured maybe it was just a weird coincidence, or maybe he was really good at recognizing people. Either way, I didn't feel comfortable engaging. Then the messages started coming. "You seem nice. Let's meet sometime. Don't ignore me. I know you saw this." Each one made me more uncomfortable than the last. I blocked him on the app after the fourth message, hoping that would be the end of it. It wasn't. The very next day, I got a follow request on Instagram from a profile with his name. My Instagram doesn't have my full name either. It's just a nickname my friends call me. Somehow, he'd found that too. The message that came with the request was what really freaked me out. "You should be more approachable. I'm just trying to be friendly." I immediately blocked him there too and set my account to private, something I should have done ages ago. I spent that night going through all my social media accounts, checking privacy settings, and making sure my personal information wasn't visible anywhere. For a few days, things were quiet. I started to think maybe he'd gotten the message and moved on. I was wrong. 5 days after the initial delivery, I was on my shift and noticed a silver Fiat Palio following me. At first, I thought I was being paranoid, But after making 3 deliveries and seeing the same car each time, parked a little distance away, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I remembered Victor's dating profile had pictures of him next to a silver Fiat Palio. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time my phone buzzed with a notification, I jumped. I started taking screenshots of everything, the messages, the follow requests, even made notes of when I saw the car. The next day, I called in sick. I couldn't face going out there, not knowing if he was waiting for me. My brother Lucas could tell something was wrong when he came over to check on me. I've always been close with Lucas. He's 3 years older and has always been protective. When I finally showed him everything and told him what was happening, I saw a side of him I rarely see. He was furious. "This freak is stalking you," he said. "You need to report this to the police." I wasn't sure if the police would take it seriously. It's not like Victor had directly threatened me, and I worried they'd just dismiss it as an overreaction. But Lucas insisted. "Until this is sorted, I'm coming with you on your shifts," he told me. I didn't argue. Having him there made me feel safer. 2 nights later, Lucas was riding along with me. We were about halfway through my shift when we stopped at a gas station for Lucas to use the bathroom. That's when I saw it, the silver Fiat Palio, parked near the convenience store. And Victor was inside, pretending to browse magazines but clearly watching me through the window. Lucas noticed my face change. "What's wrong?" "That's him," I whispered. "The guy in the store. That's Victor." Lucas immediately wanted to confront him, but I grabbed his arm. "No, let's go to the police station now. We have proof he's following me." Reluctantly, Lucas agreed. We drove straight to the nearest police station, and I filed a report with an officer who, thankfully, took it seriously. She asked for all the screenshots I had taken and wrote down the license plate number of Victor's car that we provided. "This is clearly harassment," she said. "We'll pay him a visit and issue a warning. If he continues, we can look at more serious measures." That night, the officer called to confirm they had spoken to Victor and warned him about stalking and harassment charges. She said he had appeared surprised and claimed he was just trying to be friendly, but had agreed to stop all contact. I wasn't taking any chances. I changed all my social media accounts, using different usernames. I started sharing my location with Lucas during late shifts. I varied my routes home and avoided the neighborhood where Victor lived entirely. For the next few weeks, I was constantly looking over my shoulder. Every silver car made my heart race. I kept checking the rearview mirror on deliveries. I installed a security camera at my apartment door. The messages stopped, though. Victor's accounts disappeared from my blocked lists. Either he deleted them or created new ones. I never received any new requests from unknown accounts. The silver Fiat Palio didn't show up on my routes anymore. As weeks passed without incident, I started to relax a little. Maybe the police warning had worked. Maybe he found someone else to fixate on, which is a terrible thought, but I couldn't help thinking it. It's been almost 2 months now, and I haven't seen or heard from Victor. I still take precautions. I never deliver to his address or that area. I keep my social media locked down tight, and I don't post about where I'm working or living. The whole experience felt like something from a bad movie, but it was my reality. It's terrifying how easy it was for him to find my personal information just from one brief delivery interaction. I've thought a lot about how vulnerable delivery drivers are. We go to strangers' homes, often alone, often at night. Our faces and sometimes our names are visible to customers through the apps. What keeps me up sometimes is not knowing why me. Was it really just my voice he liked? Was I just randomly selected for his obsession? Or had he been watching me before, and the delivery was just his chance to make contact? I'll never know, and maybe that's better. I still work deliveries, but I'm much more cautious now. I don't chat with customers beyond what's necessary. I vary my routes constantly. I don't accept deliveries to unfamiliar apartment buildings at night if I can help it. The most unsettling part is that I still don't know if it's truly over, or if he's just waiting, watching from a distance. Sometimes I think I catch glimpses of him in crowds, or see his car in my peripheral vision. But when I look directly, there's nothing there. Maybe it's just paranoia, my brain playing tricks after the stress of it all. All I know is that one simple food delivery changed everything for me. What should have been a forgettable 5-minute interaction turned into weeks of fear and anxiety. So if you're reading this and you work in delivery or any service job that puts you in contact with strangers, please be careful about your personal information. You never know who might be on the other side of that door. Story 18. I still wake up in a cold sweat sometimes, my heart racing when I hear metal scraping against metal. It's been 6 months since that day in the Mojave, but the nightmares haven't stopped. I've never shared this publicly, but I need to get it off my chest, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar or can make sense of what we encountered. My friends and I, we're urban explorers. Nothing too extreme, just checking out abandoned buildings, old factories, that sort of thing. We'd post our adventures on social media, follow other explorers, the usual stuff. Charles was the most passionate among us. He'd always find these obscure places through his network of contacts. James was more cautious, always double-checking our equipment and planning escape routes. Me? I was just along for the ride mostly, though I provided the transportation. My trusty Wrangler that could access spots most vehicles couldn't. It started when Charles found this mysterious Instagram account, Desert Secrets, 1931, that posted coordinates to supposedly undocumented locations in the Mojave. Most looked like standard ghost town stuff, but then came a post about abandoned mining networks. The caption mentioned untouched chambers that haven't seen human presence in nearly a century. Charles became obsessed. "Guys, this is the real deal," he kept saying, showing us grainy photos of wooden structures half buried in sand. These mines were operational until the 1930s, when some accident shut everything down. The companies just abandoned equipment right where it stood. James was skeptical. How do we know this isn't just someone setting us up to get robbed in the middle of nowhere? Charles insisted the account was legit. Look at their other posts. People have verified these locations. I should have sided with James. But Charles had this way of making everything sound like we'd be missing out on the discovery of a lifetime. So one Saturday morning in late March, we loaded up my Wrangler with our exploration gear and headed into the desert. I remember how excited we all were during the drive, talking about what we might find, maybe old mining equipment or historical artifacts. The coordinates led us to absolute nothingness, just stretches of sand, scrubby bushes, and rock formations. We drove slowly through terrain that got increasingly rough, following Charles's phone GPS that kept losing signal. After about 2 hours of searching, we were ready to give up. "This is bullshit," James said. "There's nothing out here." I was about to agree when Charles pointed toward a distant rock formation. "Look, something's sticking out over there." I navigated the Wrangler as close as I could, and we walked the rest of the way. Among the rocks was a weathered wooden structure, bleached almost white by the sun. The boards were warped with gaps between them, but it was unmistakably man-made, some kind of entrance frame. Behind it was a dark, ominous opening in the rock face. Holy shit, I whispered, a chill running through me despite the desert heat. It's actually here. Charles was practically bouncing with excitement. Did I tell you or what? This is incredible. We stood at the entrance, peering into darkness that seemed to swallow our flashlight beams. The smell coming from it was strange, musty and metallic, like old pennies mixed with dust. We should check if the air is breathable, James said, always the practical one. He pulled out a small device from his backpack that measured oxygen levels and potential toxic gases. After waving it around the entrance, he nodded. Oxygen levels are fine, no methane detected, but we should still wear masks. There's probably a century of dust in there. We put on our dust masks and readied our flashlights. I remember hesitating at the entrance, feeling a strange resistance. Not physical, but almost like my instincts were screaming at me to stay in the sunlight. But Charles was already stepping inside, and James followed. I didn't want to be the coward. The shaft wasn't vertical like I'd expected. It sloped downward at maybe a 30-degree angle, with old wooden supports every few yards. The ground was uneven, mostly packed dirt with occasional wooden planks that creaked underfoot. Our flashlights created dancing shadows that made every corner look like something was moving there. "Watch your step," Charles called back. "Some of these boards might be rotted through." The temperature dropped noticeably as we descended. I was sweating in my t-shirt above ground, but now I wished I'd brought a jacket. The air felt heavy, pressing against my skin, making each breath feel slightly restricted, even though James's device said oxygen levels were normal. We must have been descending for 20 minutes when the shaft leveled out into what looked like a hub of sorts. Several tunnels branched off in different directions, each identical, dark mouths leading to who knows where. The ceiling here was higher, supported by thicker wooden beams. There were rusted metal tracks on the ground in some tunnels, remnants of mining carts. "Which way?" I asked, my voice sounding strangely muffled. Charles consulted a compass app on his phone. "Let's try east first," he said, pointing to a tunnel on our right. This tunnel was narrower, forcing us to walk single file. The walls were rough-hewn, with occasional glints of something metallic catching our flashlight beams. Water dripped somewhere in the distance, the gentle plink-plink echoing eerily. We'd been walking for maybe 10 minutes when we first heard it, a faint scraping sound, like something being dragged across stone. We all froze. "What was that?" James whispered. "Probably just rocks settling," Charles replied, though he didn't sound convinced. "These places make all kinds of noises." We continued more cautiously. The tunnel widened into a larger chamber with what looked like old equipment, rusted metal contraptions whose purpose I couldn't guess. The scraping sound came again, louder this time, echoing from somewhere ahead of us. It was rhythmic, almost deliberate. Scrape, pause, scrape, pause. "Hello?" Charles called out, his voice bouncing off the walls. "Anyone there?" James shot him a horrified look. "What are you doing?" "It could be another explorer," Charles said defensively. The scraping stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. "I don't like this," I said, my mouth dry with fear. "Maybe we should head back." "We came all this way," Charles argued. "Let's at least check out this chamber properly." We spread out slightly, examining the rusted equipment. James was photographing some markings on a large metal container when his flashlight flickered and went out. He smacked it against his palm, and it came back on, off, on again. In those split-second intervals of darkness, the scraping sound started again, much closer this time. And then it changed, a horrible metal-on-metal screech that made my teeth hurt, followed by the most terrifying sound I've ever heard. It was a scream, but not human. It started low, like air being forced through a narrow pipe, then rose to a pitch that seemed impossible, too high, too loud for anything living to make. It resonated through the chamber, vibrating in my chest, scraping against my eardrums. "Run!" I don't know which of us shouted it, maybe all of us, but we were already moving, stumbling over each other to get back to the tunnel. The screaming continued, now accompanied by something else, a rapid clicking sound and heavy, wet thumps against the stone floor. Whatever it was moving fast, and it was coming toward us. I didn't dare look back. I focused on James's back ahead of me and Charles's bobbing flashlight beam leading the way. The tunnel seemed endless now, stretching impossibly long compared to our journey in. "The junction!" Charles gasped. "We need to get to the junction!" We burst into the hub area, momentarily confused by the multiple identical tunnels. "Which way?" James shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "There!" I pointed to what I hoped was our entrance shaft. We sprinted toward it, the sounds behind us growing louder, more frenzied. As we started climbing the sloped shaft, I felt my right foot catch on something. I crashed down hard, my chin connecting with the packed earth. Pain exploded through my jaw and I tasted blood. Worse, I felt my shoe pull off completely as I fell. "Help!" I screamed, scrambling to my feet. The pain in my bare foot was immediate and intense. Something had pierced my skin the moment I put weight on it. Charles and James turned back, their flashlights illuminating my face. "Come on!" Charles grabbed my arm, hauling me upward. "Keep going!" Each step was agony. Something was embedded in my foot, a nail, a shard of metal, I couldn't tell. But the sounds behind us were getting closer, so I gritted my teeth and kept climbing, leaving bloody footprints on the dirt and wooden planks. The shaft seemed twice as long going up. My lungs burned, my injured foot throbbed with each step, and fear pushed me forward like a physical force. Finally, mercifully, we saw daylight ahead, a small square of blue sky that grew larger as we neared the surface. James reached it first, scrambling out into the sunlight. He turned and helped pull Charles up. They both reached down for me, grabbing my arms and hauling me out. I collapsed onto the sand, gasping for air, my foot pulsing with white-hot pain. "What the fuck was that?" James panted, looking back at the dark entrance. "I don't know," Charles said, his face ashen. "I don't know." My foot was a mess. Blood soaked through my sock, and I could see something dark protruding from my arch. When I tried to stand, I nearly passed out from the pain. "We need to get him to a hospital," James said, examining my foot without touching it. "There's something stuck deep in there." They half carried me back to my Wrangler. I remember little of the drive to the nearest town, just waves of pain and the three of us, trying to process what had happened. We made up a story for the emergency room, that I'd stepped on something while hiking. The doctor extracted several large wooden splinters from my foot, some nearly 2 inches long. The largest had missed a major tendon by millimeters. "You're lucky," she told me. "This could have caused permanent damage." I couldn't walk normally for almost 2 weeks. During that time, we tried to make sense of what had happened. What had made those sounds? Why did the mind seem to change as we fled? And most puzzling, what was still living down there, in a place that should have been abandoned for nearly a century? 4 days after the incident, Charles messaged us both. "James, didn't you drop your wallet in the mine?" James checked his pockets, his face paling. "Shit, it must have fallen out when we were running." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You want to go back?" "Just to the entrance," Charles insisted. "Maybe it's right inside. We won't go deep again." Against my better judgment, I agreed to drive them. My foot was still bandaged, but I could walk with a cane. I stayed in the car while they approached the entrance. 10 minutes later, they came jogging back, James empty-handed and Charles carrying something. "Your shoe," he said, holding it up for me to see. My stomach dropped. The shoe was partially blackened, as if it had been held over a flame. And there were marks along the heel and sole, deep indentations that looked disturbingly like teeth marks. Too big, too numerous to be from any desert animal I knew. "Where did you find it?" I asked, my mouth dry. "Just inside the entrance," James said quietly. "Sitting there like it had been placed." Charles tried messaging the Instagram account that had led us there, asking about the mine's history, about any reports of strange occurrences. The account never responded. A week later, it had been deleted. We haven't gone exploring since. Sometimes I catch Charles looking at new locations online, but something changed in him after that day, in all of us. Whatever was in that mine, whatever made those sounds and left those marks on my shoe, it wasn't natural. It couldn't be. And the thought that keeps me awake at night is this: what does it eat, living so deep in the earth, where nothing else survives? And why did it let us leave?